Dreamworks, one of the most popular hit-or-miss studios of all time. A company that was quite literally founded out of spite, Dreamworks Animation have had quite a few ups and downs over the years, and that's being generous. One minute, they're redefining animated movies as we know them, the next they're making people question their faith in humanity. But hey, inconsistency is a fun quirk of Dreamworks. While Pixar is a studio people expect almost nothing but high quality from, which makes their low points sting even more, Dreamworks, you never really know what to expect. You could get a very pleasant surprise, a mediocre dud, or a cinematic test of patience.
It's kind of hard to see where these people are gonna go, so I thought it would be fun to see their entire list of films and see how they stack up against each other. I was wrong, this was not fun.
Okay, that's not entirely accurate, since it was cool finally seeing some of these movies and getting to rewatch some of my favorites, but I severely underestimated how many movies I was gonna have to watch. With the exception of 1998 and 2018, Dreamworks have released at least one new movie every single year since 1998, and most of those had two, sometimes even three. In total, I had to go through 50 movies for this ranking. I spent 2 months watching almost nothing but Dreamworks movies.
So part of me thinks this was all a big waste of time and effort, but whatever. It's time to finally show the fruits of my labor. Strap in, lizards and gizzards, because we're in this for the long run. Also, I'm just gonna get this out of the way first. No, Mega Man vs. the Doom Syndicate does not count. That was made by a different studio. I am not watching it. You can't make me.
Boo! You stink!
I gotta say, the bottom entry on this list is much more interesting than it was in the Pixar ranking, because with a Pixar, 9 times out of 10 the last place entry will be Cars 2, unless you're someone who likes it ironically like me, in which case it'll probably be The Good Dinosaur, Brave, or Lightyear. Dreamworks, on the other hand, has a lot more stinkers, so there's a lot more variability when it comes to that, and yet, even still, there are 3 movies in particular that stand above the rest as being rather infamous. 3 movies made by this studio that get ripped apart more than anything else. And given how 2 of them are the lowest rated Dreamworks movies ever on Rotten Tomatoes, that's not too surprising. What is surprising, though, is that none of them are at the bottom for me. Yes, you heard that correctly. I actually managed to find one film that's even worse than all 3 of their most notorious works. Worse than the franchise-ruining awkwardness of Shrek the Third. Worse than the sheer stupidity and insanity of The Boss Baby. Worse than the soul-crushing ugliness of Shark Tale. There is somehow, by some miracle, at least one movie that I hate more than any of these.
And I know what you're thinking. Oh, I've seen every Dreamworks movie ever made, and there's no way there's a movie that's worse than all 3 of those. And to that I say, have you really seen every Dreamworks movie ever made? Because I am fairly confident you have not seen this one.
Not only is this the least viewed Dreamworks movie on Letterboxd with only 8,000 ratings, while also having the lowest average rating of all of them, but it also has the lowest box office gross in the studio's entire history, excluding the 2 that didn't get theatrical releases. Yes, this movie somehow made even less money at the box office than both Trolls World Tour and Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken. I didn't even know it existed until I researched this topic a couple of years ago, and honestly, I kinda wish it stayed that way, because this movie was one of the most insufferable things I have ever had to sit through.
Okay, I've stalled it out long enough. You wanna know what it is. So, it is with great pleasure that I now have the ability to bestow the title of the absolute worst Dreamworks movie ever made to Spirit Untamed.
This has to be one of the most soulless, generic, bland, boring, and downright nothing movies I have ever seen. I knew basically nothing about what happens in this movie going in, and I was quite frankly appalled by what I saw, because what I saw was nothing! There is literally nothing of any substance in here. This whole movie feels like a bad cartoon from the 1980s that wanted to sell toys to 4-year-old girls, and even by that standard, it's terrible. For starters, this movie not only had the lowest box office of any Dreamworks movie, it also had the lowest budget, and I'm sure that won't surprise you because this animation is honestly worse than Shrek, and it came out 20 years later. The character models are basic, the environments have almost no detail, the textures are barely visible, and the movement and expressions are really really stiff. Everything just looks bad. The story is honestly one of the most overused and cliched things I've ever seen, and it's just plain stupid. Tell me if any of these plot points sound familiar, okay? A young girl named Lucky loses her mom in a horse riding accident, so she moves in with her aunt and grandpa, but doesn't like it because she's forced to act like a proper lady, so she goes to spend the summer at her father's ranch where she befriends a wild horse named Spirit. But oh no, her father doesn't want her around horses because it hits too close to home. She ignores him and befriends the horse anyway, along with these two other girls who I don't even remember the names of, and I'm not gonna look it up because I don't care. And oh no, an evil group of ranchers are trying to sell the horses on the black market, and the police don't exist in the Old West, so it's up to 3 10-year-old girls to stop them, and oh my god, this is so dumb.
And what makes things even worse is that I don't think it's possible to care about any of these characters in any capacity.
Lucky is incredibly generic, her 2 friends are honestly pretty annoying, the dad sucks, the villains are idiots, and everyone else is completely interchangeable. The only thing they keep from the first movie is that the horse still doesn't talk, which I do appreciate a little bit, and they at least tried to keep his personality, but since the animation is a lot worse, it doesn't shine through anywhere near as much. And the bond it has with Lucky just feels like it happens because it's supposed to, and not naturally. Hickam and Toothless, this ain't. But you wanna know what the stupidest thing about this movie is? Remember how I said the mother died in a horse riding accident? Well, that's because she used to perform tricks on it as part of a circus, but one of those tricks went horribly wrong. What was the trick and what exactly went wrong? I have no idea, because they literally say nothing about it! It happens completely off screen, and they don't discuss it at all. Did she try to do a backflip and break her neck? Did she just fall off and get trampled? Did she jump through a flaming hoop and get burned alive? Well, the answer will have to remain complete mystery because we don't want to scare the toddlers in the audience. How are we supposed to be emotionally affected by something if we have no idea what it is? That's just bad writing.
There's 2 different things people usually say is the worst effect a piece of media can have on you. It can make you aggressively angry, or it can bore you to tears. You can debate which one is worse all you want, but Spirit Untamed is one of the rare examples to actually do both.
This movie not only pissed me off with how stupid it was, but it was so boring and dull that I barely remembered what actually happened. They took what many people regard as one of the most environmental and ambitious DreamWorks movies ever and turned it into a D-grade My Little Pony ripoff. I absolutely hated this piece of crap. It's honestly one of the worst animated movies I've ever seen in my life. I know it's clearly aimed at a very young demographic, but even they deserve better than this. Whether it be a decent moral lesson or memorable characters or even a few good jokes, I don't know, just something of value. At least a lot of the other DreamWorks stinkers can be fun to talk about, but this honestly just left me depressed because it literally has no value at all. I watched both this and The Boss Baby 2 in the same day, and when that is the better one, something is severely wrong. I guess the only redeeming quality is the fact that almost nobody even knows it exists, and quite frankly, that's the highest level of respect that this worthless void of nothingness deserves. Don't watch this movie and don't even bother talking about it. Let's all just collectively forget it exists and move on.
Where did the sharks come from?
I've got a great shark guy.
Oh boy, out of all of the movies in this marathon, Shark Tale was by far the one I was dreading the most. And while it managed to get very, very, very lucky, that still doesn't let it escape the ass blasting it deserves.
This is probably the most infamous DreamWorks movie ever made, and safe to say that reputation is 100% justified.
For starters, I mean, look at it. This is the worst looking animated movie I've ever seen from a major studio. It just looks hideous. The character designs and their expressions, the way they move, the backgrounds, the environments, they all look disgusting. No joke, one time when I was younger, this movie was the first thing that popped up when I turned on the TV, and I watched it for like 10 seconds before changing the channel because of how gross everything looked. But this movie isn't just an assault on your eyes, it's an assault on your ears and your brain too, because it features what is easily the most unlikable main character in any DreamWorks movie ever. The Will Smith fish, no, I'm not calling it by his name because he doesn't deserve it, is basically the villain of the movie. Pretty much everything that happens is his fault, and it's all because he just wants to be rich and famous. That's it. But wait, he was bullied in school for wanting to work in a whale wash like his father. That totally justifies treating everyone around you like crap, lying up for your fame and fortune, and betting the money you got from your friend giving you a family heirloom so you could pay off your debt on a horse race. I mean, he does buy the pearl back for her later, but still. On that subject, what the hell does his friend even see him in anyway? As we discussed, he is not a likable character, and he's the source of many children getting nightmares. What about him is desirable in any way? As for the other characters, the villains are forgettable, Lenny's kind of annoying, but not horrible, I guess. This thing is And seriously, what the hell is Martin Scorsese doing in this movie, and why is he so unfunny? The world they live in is just a generic underwater city, and I guess there are some kinda decent ideas like the whale wash or the shark mafia, but they don't really add much in the grand scheme of things. But hey, maybe this could be salvageable if it it had some good jokes in it. Too bad almost every single joke in this movie is either a stupid fish pun, a pointless pop culture reference, or the most common one, both. Not to mention this movie can barely go 5 minutes without playing another random pop song in the background. This entire movie is insufferable, and it all builds up to one of the stupidest endings I've seen in a long time. The truth is revealed that Lenny doesn't want to eat fish, and it leads to this big ridiculous chase scene that's not entertaining. Will Smith fish traps the sharks in the whale wash and then tells them he needs to accept his son for who he is, and he just does. Yeah, right then and there. No other convincing, he just accepts him. He also reveals that he lied about killing the shark, and that's the one thing I'll give this movie credit for, is they don't have the tedious liar revealed third act, but this is still stupid, and this guy literally gets no repercussions for anything he does. Honestly, I didn't even really care anymore. I just wanted this movie to be over because it is abysmal.
If you're wondering why I put this above Spear and Untamed, though, there's a couple of reasons. One is that this movie did actually manage to make me laugh. Once.
In the opening, we see that there's a sushi restaurant, but no one comes to because, well, take a guess why, and then the owner gets mad about it. Honestly, that's one of the jokes that is dumb, but at least it's aware of how dumb it is that I do actually think it's kind of funny. Too bad it's only in the first few minutes. And the second reason is, as bad as Shark Tale is, at least I remember it. It has some effort put into it with the voice acting and maybe an occasional chuckle, so congratulations, Shark Tale. You managed to escape being the bottom slot on this list by the skin of your teeth. Consider yourself lucky you have one decently funny joke.
Honestly, the funniest thing about this movie has nothing to do with the film itself. It's the fact that Will Smith actually won the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Award for Favorite Voice in an Animated Movie, and the award was actually presented by his wife, Jada, alongside one of her co-stars for the next Dreamworks film, Chris Ruff. Something aging that amazingly. Oh my god. Oh my god, that's gold. That is gold.
Would they up the ante or take a giant step backwards? A giant step backwards.
Dreamworks has had a lot of big franchises over the years, but easily the biggest one is the Shrek trilogy. The film series that pretty much set the staple for most of the studio's films, and regardless of your thoughts on that, you can't deny that Shrek, Shrek 2, and Shrek Forever After have each brought a lot of joy to a lot of people over the years.
Wait, what? What do you mean Shrek isn't a trilogy? I mean, yeah, I know there's gonna be a new one, but that doesn't come out until next year. What else is there? Oh, right. That.
Yeah, despite people having some varied opinions on the Shrek movies, I think the one thing we can all agree on is that Shrek the Third is absolute garbage. I think this might be the biggest dip in quality I've ever seen for a movie series, or at least going from one entry to another. And it's a shame because it really didn't need to be. On paper, this movie doesn't seem like it would be that bad, but it manages to take any potential it had and just do nothing with it. Takes, for example, the jokes. You know, the most important aspect of any comedy movie. The jokes in this movie almost never get a laugh, some of which it's because they just aren't funny, while others could be funny, but the timing and delivery just comes across as really awkward.
Seriously, how does a movie with 2 Monty Python members in it be this unfunny?
I think the only jokes in this movie that actually made me laugh were Pinocchio's twisted way of telling the truth to not make his nose grow, and when Puss tries to do the cute eyes in Donkey's body. Maybe there's a couple more, but that's all that come to mind. I mean, hey, that's still better than Shark Tale. But the real missed potential comes in the form of the story. Shrek worrying about becoming a father isn't an awful idea, but they don't really do anything with it aside from this nightmare fuel. Arthur could be a solid character, but he's just really bland and uninteresting. The scene where all the princesses break themselves out could have been really fun, but it only lasts for like a minute, and easily the biggest waste of this movie is the villain. I think the idea of Prince Charming coming back and rounding up a group of other disgraced fairy tale creatures is really solid, and it would be a nice evolution of his character from the last movie, going from a bumbling idiot to a legit threat. Problem is, he's still an idiot. His big plan once he takes over is to just put on a play in front of everyone where he's the hero. Like, what? This is the climax of the movie? Stopping the villain from putting on a play? I mean, yeah, I know he's gonna kill Shrek at the end, but still, this is what he's been working towards this whole time? How am I supposed to take that seriously? And I haven't even gotten to how inconsistent the tone is. I seriously can't tell if the king's death was supposed to be funny or dramatic, but I don't really care because it completely fails at both. It's too slow and dragged out to be funny and too obnoxious to be dramatic, which is kind of a problem for what was such a good character in the last movie.
But I will give credit, there is one genuinely good scene in the movie.
The part where Shrek and Arthur talk by the fire is actually pretty sweet. It's a nice bonding moment between the two of them, and the only time we really explore Shrek's uncertainty about having kids. It's basically the equivalent of the stick scene in The Good Dinosaur. But one good scene isn't enough to save what was otherwise a boring, unfunny slog of a movie. Part of me debated giving it a 3 out of 10, but I just gave it a 2 because of how much of a downgrade it was from the previous movies. Most Shrek fans agree this movie doesn't exist, and it is not hard to see why.
But luckily, we are done with the 2 out of 10, so now we can step it up to the 3s. Whatever, let's just get to the good stuff.
Are you the baby Jesus?
Yes, I'm the baby Jesus.
I think my brain might be broken because I honestly didn't think the Boss Baby was as bad as people said it is. I mean, it's bad. Very bad, but I wouldn't call it one of the worst things I've ever seen. It at least has some creativity to it, particularly the animation during some of the fantasy sequences. It's not much, but it's more than anything from the bottom 3 movies on this list. It did get a few laughs out of me, like them getting to Vegas by hiding on a plane full of Elvis impersonators. That is honestly kind of funny in how random, yet also logical it is. I kind of like Steve Buscemi as the villain. I mean, his plan makes no sense, but his performance can get an occasional chuckle here and there.
And I will fully admit, this is a genuinely good line.
My dad says those who can, do. And those who can't, supervise.
But don't let my mild surprise fool you. This movie stinks. This has got to be some of the worst world building in anything I've ever seen, because it isn't clear whether or not this is real or all made up. I guess that's part of the idea, but they don't do it well. They mostly imply it's all real, but then make it look fake just for a gag. And what's up with the wizard clock? Is that real too, or is that all in Tim's head? I have no idea. On top of being absurdly confusing, half of the opening feels like a freaking horror movie. It's honestly kind of terrifying, and I have no idea if it was intentional or not. Speaking of terrifying, having Alec Baldwin's voice come out of a baby is one of the most unsettling images I've ever seen. And no, he's not a likable character, and neither is Tim. The jokes are not funny, I know, shocking with such a brilliant setup, but the story makes no sense at all. Apparently there's only a certain amount of love adults can give, and soon there will be a puppy that they love so much there won't be enough for babies. Is this supposed to be commentary on how some people would rather have pets than kids, or is it just stupid? I think I'm gonna go with option B on this one, but that's just my 2 cents.
That's not even getting into the fact that this movie has an unhealthy obsession with baby butts, which I will not be showing because I feel like just watching this movie is gonna put me on the list.
It also has probably the most forced third act breakup I've ever seen, and why did nobody question why a young kid was sitting on the floor of an airport crying alone? He is there for literal hours. Did nobody see this and think to ask where his parents are or to call security? Safe to say The Boss Baby is about as enjoyable as a movie written by actual babies. The only good thing to come out of it was this tweet from Alex Hirsch. But even with that, it shockingly wasn't enough to make me angry. I don't know. I didn't really feel insulted by this movie. I was just mildly annoyed. The main issue is that it's just dumb, but even as far as dumb goes, there's far worse options out there. It's brain rot, but it's harmless brain rot. Frankly, the most insulting thing about this movie is the fact that it somehow got an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Feature. Like, what? At least Shark Tale had the excuse of being an early on in the category's history. This came out in 2017, the same year as these.
Business. Numbers. Is this working?
Oh, would you look at that? It's The Boss Baby 2. I honestly completely forgot about this movie. While the first one got ripped apart when it came out, this one had no reaction whatsoever. I swear, I didn't hear a single person talk about this movie. Hell, I had no idea it even came out. So unlike the last one, I went in completely blind, and yeah, it's about on par with the first one. It's stupid, it's weird, and it makes no sense, but it does have a little creativity, and the villain is once again kind of fun because of the actor. This time, he's played by the master himself, Jeff Goldblum, and once again, he isn't written very funny, but his performance does get an occasional chuckle. No joke, I literally pulled out my phone as soon as he started talking to confirm it was him, and then when I did, I just started laughing. I have no idea why he's in this movie, but honestly, I'm not gonna complain since he was one of the only shreds of enjoyment in here.
So I know what you're thinking. Why did I put this movie over the first one then?
Well, honestly, just because the new baby in the movie is voiced by Amy Sedaris, and while Alec Baldwin's voice coming out of a baby is nightmare fuel, hers honestly works okay, and like Goldblum, she can sometimes be a little funny, though part of me just kept thinking about Princess Carolyn from BoJack Horseman. Yeah, that one small plus is the only reason I put this movie higher. The rest of it is about on par with the first one. This time, the story is about a highly intelligent baby trying to make every parent in the world stupid so he can do whatever he wants. So Tim and his brother have to go undercover by drinking this magic formula that makes them young, because we gotta keep them marketable, and sneaking into the school he's running where Tim's daughter is also attending. I mean, I admit the design of school is kinda creative, but the premise is still freaking dumb. Did I mention it's also a Christmas movie? Because it is. Okay, sure. There's also a subplot with Tim trying to connect with his daughter. I don't care. The humor is again just a bunch of toilet jokes, and any attempts at drama feel forced and lazy. Most of what happens feels like I'm in a fever dream, but like, it's Boss Baby 2. Did I really expect it to be anything more? I had no expectations going in, and those expectations were met. I didn't hate this movie, but by God, I didn't like it either. Honestly, these two movies are pretty interchangeable for me. I gave this one the slight edge, but it's still pretty bad. I'm done wasting brain power on them. On to the next movie.
But you two seem to be forgetting who the real winner will be. My snail.
I honestly forgot this movie existed until a few years ago when I started doing research on this kind of stuff. Like, seriously, I vividly remember seeing the commercials all the time when it came out, but after that, it just completely left my mind. No one I knew saw it. It never aired on TV, and nobody online ever talks about it. Well, until a few months ago when people on Twitter were laughing at the taco scene. Aside from those few brief moments, this movie has had no impact on anything whatsoever. Well, aside from the fact that the Wii U game costs over $100 for some reason.
After finally watching it for myself, I totally get why, because this movie stinks. It is a bad film.
I think society as a whole owes the Cars trilogy an apology, because if you want to see a really bad kids racing movie, then here you go. This is one of the most nothing movies I have ever seen in my life. The story feels like a Ratatouille ripoff, with an animal befriending a human so he can do something an animal normally can't do, only instead of a rat wanting to cook, it's a snail wanting to race. And there's also some Spider-Man logic where he gets infused with nitrous oxide that doesn't just give him super speed, it literally makes him half car. Like his eyes become headlights and he can play radio stations and stuff. Yeah, it's dumb and pointless. But while Remy was a very likable and endearing character, Turbo is completely uninteresting. He has no personality traits or goals that make him stand out. He just wants to race because he wants to race, that's it. His brother is extremely condescending and not likable at all. The supporting cast from both the humans and the snails are completely one-note and forgettable. Hell, even the main human he's supposed to be bonding with has no connecting with him whatsoever. They just kinda look at each other and that's it. Again, with the Ratatouille comparison, what made that movie work was that you feel the growing connection between Remy and Linguini. These two just look at each other, and that's it. They try to have some connections with them both having disapproving brothers that come around at the end, but that's really about it.
And maybe I could forgive it for being generic and boring if it was a little funny. But it isn't.
Yeah, there's an occasional chuckle here and there, mainly from the running gag about snails getting eaten by crows, but that's really it. Which is crazy, because this movie has a stacked voice cast. Ryan Reynolds, Paul Giamatti, Ben Schwartz, Bill Hader, Maya Rudolph, Snoop Dogg, freaking Samuel L. Jackson is in this movie. Like, why is he here? And why is he not funny? The big race at the end is honestly the best and worst part of the movie. Best because him actually using his size to his advantage is honestly fairly entertaining, and some of the tricks he pulls off are kinda cool. Not amazing, but hey, there's some creativity in here. But it's also the worst part because it's when the story goes from generic to just stupid. So the racer Turbo admired turns out to be an ass, because reasons, and he goes on about this to the snail, because reasons, and then he starts acting a lot more pompous, because reasons. I mean, they do kinda hint at this earlier when he tells the camera to focus on him, but that is the only thing. That's not even the worst part though. He ends up causing this giant crash, which breaks Turbo's shell, causing him to lose his speed, so he just curls up into a ball and gives up, despite the fact that he is literally right there! Just go! You are meters away from the finish line, and everyone else is behind you! I mean, the bad guy dragging his cart across the line is kinda funny, and I do like how a callback is what wins him the race, but this is still stupid. I wouldn't say this movie is awful, since honestly, it left me more bored than angry. It's not as infuriating or insulting as the movies below, it's just a basic bad kids movie. I'd much rather rewatch it over the previous films on this list, but don't be fooled, this movie's still bad. It was generic, boring, and completely uninteresting. Turbo blows, and you should race as far away from it as possible.
E.T. Phone home.
Oh, give me a home where the aliens roam and the people are thrown in the slums, where they're all annoying, no one likes Sheldon, and Rihanna's looking for her mom. Yeah, home stinks.
This is another movie I didn't have high expectations for, and it's about what I thought I would get. Tip is boring lead, and O is incredibly annoying, so naturally, I don't care for the dynamic because I don't like them. Most of the jokes are also pretty bad. The aliens mistaking human things can get a small laugh sometimes, but everything else is just annoying. But the vast majority of this movie is boring. It's just a generic road trip movie with characters I don't like trying to stop an invitation from being broadcast to the entire universe, which they stop an hour into the movie, and yet it just keeps going. Plus, the villain gets the message anyway, so what was the point of stopping it? It's a shame because I think there's some potential in here. The booth designs are generic, but I like the way they move and ripple and change colors depending on their emotions. It's not much, but it's a fun little detail that shows there was some effort put into the movie. Plus, the different gadgets they have are pretty creative. This isn't a movie that was dead on arrival. It really had some potential. Like many other Dreamworks movies, it was based on a book you've never heard of called The True Meaning of Smek Day. And I've never read it, but it sounds interesting, certainly more interesting than this. But easily the biggest problem with the movie is the fact that it ends with the humans being completely okay with the booth. Keep in mind, the plot of the movie is that these aliens, called the booth, are on the run from these other aliens, so they invade Earth, force all of the humans into tiny living spaces, and take over their land. Yeah, these guys straight up colonize them, and while at first it seems like a bad thing, by the end, they're completely okay with it. Why? Because of the other big aliens, who, as it turns out, are only chasing them because the leader of the booth unintentionally stole the big aliens' children. That makes everything completely okay, apparently. Yeah, no, the captain is clearly the bad guy in this movie, and even if you make the argument that everyone else is just following him, he still gets off scot-free. You can see him DJing during the ending dance party, because of course this movie ends with that.
This whole mess was entirely his fault. His cowardice and stupidity caused the booth to lose their home planet. He made them colonize the people of Earth, forcing them out of their homes. He likely caused the deaths of many innocent people, and for all we know, this could have happened to multiple other planets. Why is this guy not in jail?
This has got got to be one of the dumbest endings to any animated movie I've ever seen. Home has a little more creativity than some of the other Dreamworks duds, but I still really didn't like this movie. It's boring, annoying, and infuriating. The unholy trio, and if there's any planet that should be eradicated, it's this one. Also, since Rihanna is both the voice of the main character and sings an in-the-universe song, why does nobody question the fact that Tip sounds exactly like a famous pop singer?
Whatever, we're finally done with a 3 out of 10 so we can step it up to the 4s. Thank God for some sweet, sweet mediocrity.
Close your eyes, shut your mouth, dream a dream and get us out. Dream, 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 dream.
I debated whether or not I should include this movie on the list since it's the only direct-to-video movie DreamWorks made, but it's listed on the Wikipedia article, and it's still technically made by DreamWorks Animation, unlike Mega Man vs. The Doom Syndicate, which is made by DreamWorks Animation Television, and thus is excluded from this ranking, thank Christ. Though honestly, I have very little to say about Joseph King of Dreams. This is a sequel, spin-off, companion title to The Prince of Egypt. I don't really know what this is exactly qualified as, because despite having a similar animation style and being another biblical story set in Egypt, it has virtually no connection.
Either way, it's just a cheap cash grab like most of the direct-to-video Disney sequels. But as far as cheap cash grabs go, I guess it could have been worse.
The story and characters are not very interesting. I know it's based on a story from the Bible, which I'm not familiar with, but either it's not a very interesting story, or they do a very good job of telling it. Joseph isn't a very likable character, and the side characters are all pretty forgettable. The songs are insanely rushed and super lazy, and most of the movie is super slow because not much really happens in it. Aside from the scene with Joseph being sold into slavery, the movie is pretty much nothing but talking, and it's not very enjoyable to watch. But the animation is passable, and the voice acting is alright. The movie is thankfully short, it's only like an hour and 10 minutes, and I do really like how the dream sequences take on different animation styles. That's honestly pretty cool. But the majority of this movie was just in one ear out the other. I'm glad this was the only direct-to-video film DreamWorks made because that saved me a lot of time and energy. This is one of the most forgettable movies I've ever seen in my life, and I am never gonna think about it again. I did not care for The Croods. This was one of the most generic animated movies I've ever seen in my life. I mean, there are some kinda neat things like the landscapes look nice and the creatures have creative designs, but everything else ranges from bad to whatever. The writing doesn't get that many laughs, the people look pretty ugly, and I don't care about any of these characters. Eep is a character we've seen a million times already about feeling dragged down by her overbearing parent and wanting to leave. The dad is basically just Marlin from Finding Nemo, with it being extremely overprotective, but without any of the charm. What made Marlin work was how identifiable he was because of his tragic backstory with losing literally everything except one kid. This guy just wants to keep his family safe because he hates anything new, which is not endearing or likable. I mean, they kinda have a backstory with other families dying, but they gloss over it and treat it more like a joke, which takes away any emotional impact. This guy is really lucky he's voiced by Nicolas Cage, because otherwise he would be insufferable. Guy is okay, but not super engaging, and everyone else is just there. The only joke that I remember making me laugh is the running joke about the dad being disappointed that the grandma was alive. Aside from that, most of the lines were in one ear and out the other.
While the first 2 acts of this movie are really boring, I will admit the 3rd act is kinda decent.
The scene where they're all exploring the cave is honestly kinda fun. The different puzzles they come across are creative, and I like the visuals. The jokes get a bit better, though again, I still don't remember a lot of them, and thankfully the dad gets a bit more likable, so the more dramatic moments are passable. Like, it's not gonna make you cry, but it's much better than the rest of the movie. But does that make the movie good? No. It's dull, generic, and leaves basically no impact. I don't regret not seeing this when it came out, and there's no way I would have watched it had it not been for this marathon.
That happens to be Eris, the goddess of chaos.
Are people gonna get mad at me for not liking Sinbad? I mean, it's the 3rd lowest rated DreamWorks movie on Rotten Tomatoes behind Shrek 3 and Shark Tale, so I guess I'm not completely alone. Either way, I was not a fan of this movie, and it really boils down to one big problem. Sinbad is one of the most unlikable main characters I've ever seen in a movie. Hell, in terms of DreamWorks, I think he's second only to the Will Smith fish. I know they're trying to go for the likable jerk trope, kinda like Cusco from Emperor's New Groove, but they completely fail because I freaking hated this guy. He is a selfish, rude, obnoxious, egotistical prick that willingly puts the people around him in danger, completely tries to abandon his friend who sacrificed himself for him, and shows no gratitude to the woman who literally saved his life. And yes, I know that his arc is supposed to be about him growing as a person, but it doesn't work. He is just way too unlikable for the majority of the movie, and it doesn't feel earned at all. There are a few other issues I have, though. I didn't think the story was very interesting. It just feels like a generic adventure movie. Hell, they barely even explain what the thing they're looking for actually is. The hand-drawn animation is good, but the CGI just looks awful. How is this the last of the 2D DreamWorks movies, and yet it somehow has the worst blending with 3D out of all of them? The side characters are completely removable, with the exception of Burana, who's like the only one of them I found somewhat enjoyable to watch. That is when she's not getting into a bunch of arguments with Sinbad, because that means I have to see even more of him being a douche.
As I was watching this movie, I literally said out loud, oh my god, please don't do that thing where they just spend the whole movie arguing and then they randomly become a couple at the end. Spoiler alert, they become a couple at the end. Are you freaking kidding me?
These two have no chemistry whatsoever. Give me a break. Okay, I know that was a lot of complaining, so let's get into what I liked about this movie. Well, like I said, most of the animation is really good, Q being most. The action scenes are honestly pretty fun, not the best I've ever seen, but they are enjoyable to watch, and easily the best thing about this movie is Aeris. She's honestly a really cool villain. Her design is great, her voice is cool, the way she moves looks amazing, and her motivation is perfectly simple. She's one of those villains that's evil for the sake of her own amusement, and I honestly really enjoy villains like that, especially when they still manage to be charming, which she does. That's all it really has going for it, though. A lot of people say a movie is great when it has you rooting for the villain, but when the reason for that is because you genuinely hate the hero, I think something is wrong. Sin bad is sin mediocre.
How about the Muppets go on a world tour?
Everyone, I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to issue a trigger warning, as the following segment will discuss subject matter that many people will find sickening and horrific. I normally try to stay away from these types of subjects, but I'm afraid here it's unavoidable, as this movie does in fact feature scenes that contain James Corden. Anyways, Trolls is probably the most underwhelming Dreamworks franchise. Okay, second most, because it's very clearly aimed at a very young demographic, but thankfully it doesn't feel insultingly lazy like Spirit Untamed, so there's nothing really worth getting mad at in them.
With that said, Trolls World Tour isn't very good.
I already mentioned the most unlikable actor in Hollywood, who's the main companion to Poppy and Branch in the movie, because of course he is, but that's not the only main issue. Branch honestly feels more like an accessory in this movie, since Poppy's the only one with any sort of development, and even then, it's not much. The animation is still really good, and it's kinda nice we had to see more of the world, but even then, it's not super interesting. The writing is pretty lackluster, there's a few good jokes here and there, but even then, they aren't very memorable. Thankfully, it's not annoying, mostly, it's just kinda whatever, but probably the most mixed thing about this movie is the plot. Because I'm gonna be honest, I think the idea of dividing the kingdoms into different genres of music and connecting them together with the strings is really clever. It's simple and easy to understand, but the fact that the rock troll is trying to bring them all together to make one unified piece of music is pretty creative, and it's something I don't think I've ever really seen before. But the allegory that's attached to it is extremely obvious and feels pretty half-baked. Let people be who they are because variety is better. Yeah, okay. I feel like that could have been worked in a bit more interestingly, but as it stands, it's not very effective. It's just a simple accepting others message, and not much more than that. I wouldn't call this a bad movie, but I wouldn't exactly call it good either. If you have little kids, they'll surely like it fine, and it has less glaring issues than the movies below it, but I still don't think it works very well. Frankly, the most interesting thing about this movie is the K-pop trolls. Not the trolls themselves, but the existence of K-pop trolls implies the existence of Korea, which implies the existence of North Korea, which implies the existence of, this guy.
And with that, we are done with the 4s, so time for some middle-of-the-road 5s.
I planted them almost immediately, and a giant beanstalk shot up. I was overjoyed.
Puss in Boots was one of the most iconic characters in the Shrek franchise, so it's not surprising he got his own spin-off, and it's not very good.
I mean, it's not an awful movie, there's nothing egregiously wrong with it, but at the same time, there's nothing all that great either.
It leans a lot more into the fairy tale tropes that the main Shrek movies were mocking, which isn't a bad thing, but it doesn't really do anything super creative with them. The story feels like a generic treasure hunt, and it doesn't really do much more than that. And most of the jokes are pretty hit or miss. The action scenes are pretty fun though, Puss still remains a pretty likable character, and Kitty is a fairly solid addition, though I really did not like Humpty Dumpty. The backstory, yes, with Puss is alright, but it goes on for way too long, and the reason they split up is honestly pretty stupid, but overall Humpty is just a really lame villain. His motivation is boring, like I said, the reason for the falling out between him and Puss is entirely his fault. His design is freaking stupid, he looks like someone plastered JJ the Jet Plane's face onto one of the egg boys from Hazbin Hotel. His plan makes no sense, he's gonna have Puss arrested, and he himself will be declared as a hero, but then he'll destroy the town because he was seen as the villain. And why is no one arresting him as well, since he committed the same crimes Puss was accused of? Is it because he paid his debt to society, because he brought them money, or because they're just stupid?
But the biggest problem with Humpty is that his redemption at the end feels insanely forced.
I know they were trying to make him more sympathetic, but I did not feel bad for this guy at all. Frankly, I just wanted to see him go splat for all the crap he pulled. This entire thing was his fault, so I don't really think he deserved this. I know there was a lot of complaining for a movie I thought was just kinda but that's because I don't really have much to say about it. This movie was just pretty forgettable. There were enough entertaining parts to make it kinda worth watching, but there certainly wasn't enough to keep me coming back to it. Could have been better, but it could have been worse too.
They're not gonna catch us. We're on a mission from God.
Apparently, this movie actually has somewhat of a following. I don't know why. Like, it's not an awful movie, but it's not that great either. I mean, there are some improvements for the other films. They got rid of James Corden. We see a lot more characters than just the trolls, and a lot of them have very creative designs. I especially like these yarn creatures that look like puppets. They're honestly really inventive, and the trolls moving into this old golf course is pretty fun to see. Plus them using different prizes as weapons in the climax is kinda neat. The animation is once again really good. The soundtrack feels like a greatest hits album, but it at least sounds alright. It does try and flesh out the characters, more with Branch having more of a backstory, and Poppy having a long-lost sister. They're not amazing, but there is an attempt at least.
What really irks me about this movie, though, is the writing.
I mean, there are some honestly pretty good laughs in here, especially the titles for the boy band songs, but it also has some of the worst jokes in the trilogy because they weirdly use a lot of modern lingo. They unironically say sus in this movie. I'm not joking. But the biggest problem is easily the villains. I hated these guys, and not really in a fun way. Their plan is stupid, their motivation isn't interesting, one of them is voiced by Amy Schumer. And above all else, they are just so freaking annoying. I swear, every time it cuts back to them, I was begging for it to cut away. I could not stand these guys. The only positive was at the end, the brother claims to change his ways, and yet he still gets arrested for all the crimes he committed. That's honestly pretty funny. As a whole, this movie is completely whatever. It's harmless, but if you're over the age of 10, you're not gonna get much out of it. I really don't have anything else to say, except that it ends with revealing that Branch was in another boy band besides the one with his brothers. When did this happen? He gave up singing for most of his life. Was this in between them leaving and his grandma dying? You know what? Never mind. I don't really care. Over the Hedge is, in fact, a movie. A group of people wrote a script, some actors recorded those lines, it was professionally animated by a large team of people, and then someone edited it all together so it could be released to the public. Yeah, I didn't like this movie very much. To me, this felt like the most basic blueprint example of a Dreamworks movie. A giant list of celebrities playing non-human creatures, a bunch of generic pop songs for the soundtrack, frequent pop culture references, and adult jokes. You get the idea. And this movie doesn't really do anything new or creative. The animation is fine, like it's not great, but it does the job. The story is pretty whatever. It's another one of those liar reveal plots where one character is hiding something and initially just using a group of people, but eventually comes around only for the truth to come out. And yeah, it's not very interesting, though thankfully they gloss over the annoying parts fairly quickly. The jokes aren't very funny. There are some decent laughs, but even then, most of them aren't very memorable, and the characters are completely superfluous. I didn't really like the raccoon, and most of the other animals leave no impact whatsoever. I mean, the squirrel is kinda funny, but even then he's not great. Honestly, the funniest character in the movie was the exterminator, but he only gets like 7 minutes of screen time.
I don't know what the general consensus on this movie is, but personally, I wasn't a big fan. Most of it was just cinematic white noise to me.
I will admit the third act was the best part of the movie, as it had by far the best jokes. The two humans getting roped into the security system was hilarious. I loved the bit where the skunk becomes a reverse Pepe Le Pew, and the entire truck chase got a big amount of laughs. Oh yeah, I guess I could bring up the fact that Quicksilver from X-Men stole from the part at the end with the squirrel, if that were true, because he stole that from the Futurama episode where Fry drinks 100 cups of coffee. Over the Hedge was a completely middle-of-the-road movie. There were enough laughs so that it wasn't a complete waste of time, but I have no desire to ever watch it again. In fact, I'm struggling to remember most of what happened even as we speak, so let's just move on.
They're eating her, and then they're going to eat me! Oh my god!
I feel like Trolls is one of the finest examples of a kids movie.
I know a lot of people hate using it's a kids movie for defending crap, but I feel like there are some times where it's applicable, and this is one of those options, since it's not really a bad movie, but there's nothing of really major substance either, so adults won't get into it that much, but kids will like it totally fine.
I mean, the animation is really good. It's bright, bouncy, and colorful, and thankfully it's not to the point of overstimulation. They know when to tone it down a bit. I'd say there is just enough creativity to make this movie passable, like some of the stuff the trolls can do with their hair is kinda clever, and the backstory with the Bergens eating them is delightfully morbid. For such a bouncy, cutesy film, there are actually some dark moments, which I will always appreciate in a kids movie. There were honestly a pretty decent amount of jokes that made me laugh, but with that said, this movie is pretty much just junk food. Watchable junk food, but still junk food. It does try to have some emotional moments, and safe to say, they don't work. So much so that it results in one of the most unintentionally hilarious lines ever put on film.
Why won't you sing? Because singing killed my grandma, okay?
But yeah, the last third or so of the movie isn't hugely interesting since it tries to take itself more seriously and it just comes across as lame. The connection between these two Bergens isn't very interesting to watch, and Jesus, Russell Brand is annoying in this, but thankfully they have the brains to kill him off at the end so he can't come back in the sequels. I also feel like your tolerance for pop songs will be tested, but at the very least they bothered to record covers of all the songs instead of just playing them in the background like they normally do, and honestly they are decent enough covers, well except for the Sounds of Silence, that was completely out of place. Trolls isn't a movie with that much sustenance, and it clearly wasn't trying to be, though even then there's much better options out there. But as far as uninteresting kids movies go, there's far worse options out there too. There's nothing really offensive about it. Well, aside from the previously mentioned James Corden, but whatever.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Open my eyes!
What the hell is this movie? Seriously. What the hell is this movie?
This has got to be one of the weirdest movies I have ever seen in my entire life, purely because it has one of the most scatterbrain plots that has ever been put on film. It goes from a Seinfeld episode, to a commentary on capitalism, to Ace Attorney, to an environmental film, to the ending of Airplane, and that's not even all of it. I know this movie spawned a bunch of memes, and it's often labeled as baby's first troll movie, and I think that's because the movie itself is trolling the audience. Like, I am fully convinced this movie was made as a joke, because it is ridiculous.
I'm just gonna give you a basic brief plot synopsis of this film, and I swear I am not making any of this up, okay?
Jerry Seinfeld plays a bee who needs to pick a job for the rest of his life. He's hesitant, but decides to become a pollinator despite people telling him he can't. He then leaves the hive and winds up getting lost. He falls in love with a human woman and talks to her, which is normally prohibited by bee law. She takes him into a grocery store where he sees that humans are collecting and selling honey, with the bees getting no benefit.
Wow, honey being a scam. Who would have thought?
He then decides to sue the human race, so it randomly becomes a court drama. He wins, so the bees get all the honey, but this causes all the plants in the world to die because they stop pollinating. So, to get them back, the bee and the woman go to California to take a float from a flower parade, but then the plane gets caught in a storm, so they have to land it before the flowers die. There's also a part where the woman's boyfriend tries to kill the bee. It becomes a heist movie for like 2 seconds. There's Bee Larry King. What the hell am I watching right now?
I honestly can't tell if I like this or not, because on the one hand, the movie is certainly unpredictable, but on the other hand, it's also really inconsistent.
Like I said, the main focus of the movie jumps around a lot, and once the focus shifts, the other topics are never brought up again. Most of the characters completely disappear, and I don't think it really works as a coherent narrative, but honestly, I don't think the movie really cares. Like I said, I'm convinced that the people who made this movie were in on the joke, and part of me kinda respect that. It doesn't make for a good movie, but it does make for a fascinating one. And to give some genuine credit, this movie honestly does have some good jokes in it. Like, once you get past all the bee puns, there's some really clever writing in here, and several moments where you have to laugh simply due to how absurd everything is. Plus, what goes on in the hive is really creative in the way they make honey and stuff. So do I recommend Bee Movie? Honestly, I have no idea. I can't really say it's a good movie for how all over the map it is, but it is an entertaining one. Of course, nowadays I know a lot of people can't stand this movie for how everywhere the memes were, and yeah, that is pretty obnoxious, but judging the movie on its own, it is one of the strangest things I've ever seen in my life, but it's also a movie I will never forget, even if I might want to. Also, I was falsely led to believe that the woman wants to bang the bee. What are people talking about? Her feelings towards him are highly professional. This is a complete ripoff. I was promised a woman falling in love with a bee. I want my shape of honey, damn it!
On that note, I think it's time we finally move up to the movies that I at least kinda like, the 6 out of 10s.
Hey, an abominable snowman!
I think the best way to describe Abominable is cute. It's a pretty basic movie, but like, look at the Yeti. He's so adorable. But yeah, the rest of the movie is fine. The animation is really nice, the characters aren't amazing, but they aren't annoying either. The story is a simple returning a creature to the wild story, but it's passable enough, and the writing is pretty mixed. The best joke in the movie was easily when one of them tries to steal a bike and then it just takes off without him. That was honestly hilarious. Though that kind of balances out with the whoop, there it is gag.
No joke, I had 2 of my friends over when I watched this movie, and all 3 of us audibly groaned at that.
I do find it kind of interesting to see an American film that's set in Asia. You don't really see that very often unless it's a fairy tale or fantasy movie. And okay, there's a Yeti in here, but the point still stands. It is a modern-day Asia, which is unique. Shame a single map caused it to be banned in some countries, though. No, seriously, look it up. I'm kind of mixed on the villain, since it is kind of interesting how they effectively swap places with the henchman being the real villain of the movie, but at the same time, it's nothing all too crazy. The Yeti is easily the best part of the movie. Not only is he just precious, but his powers are really cool and creative. It's never really explained why he has them or how they work, but I feel like that kind of fits with this type of movie, and he's able to do some really cool stuff, which leads to the most entertaining parts of the movie. My favorite being when he turns the mountains into waves. That is so unique and so creative, plus the animation on them is amazing. Abominable is a perfectly fine movie. While there's movies kids will love and parents will tolerate, I feel like this is one parents can honestly enjoy. It's not a masterpiece, but it is pretty cute, and worth watching at least once if you're interested.
What's the scene, Ollie? Everybody looks like ants!
The first movie Dreamworks ever made, and also one of the weirdest. Yeah, you can tell this was when they were trying to figure out their style, since it has some of the elements they'd be known for, but not in the way you'd expect. A lot of celebrities for the cast, with some pretty crazy names like Sylvester Stallone and Jennifer Lopez, and a lot more crude and adult humor, though even further than they normally go. I'm serious, they don't sugarcoat it, they just straight up swear in this movie, and it's honestly kind of weird. As a whole, this is a really strange movie, and a lot of it feels a little rushed and unfocused. Me, because this movie was rushed so that they could release it before a different studio the founder used to work for could release their movie of the same concept. Oh hey, would you look at that?
Though if I'm being perfectly honest, I like this a bit more than A Bug's Life. I mean, I thought that one was okay, but most of the characters were forgettable and the story was extremely standard.
Here the story is a lot more memorable since it's about classism. I'm not joking, the main conflict comes from a worker ant and a soldier ant deciding to switch places. Well, at first, because then the worker ant hands the princess captive and brings her to the great beyond, which is just a picnic blanket, while another ant tries to flood the colony to give them a fresh start. Yeah, like I said, this movie is pretty unfocused, but it feels less so than B-movie, and like that, I was interested. I did want to see where it was gonna go. For 1998 standards, the animation is fine, it's a bit dated, but it certainly looks very unique, especially with the character designs. The writing is alright, nothing crazy, but it gets some solid laughs, and the best thing about this movie is the colony itself. I really like seeing how this world works. It's honestly very interesting and creative. This is the kind of stuff I wanted to see more of in A Bug's Life. While the side characters are decent enough, I especially like the Stallone ant. I'm not really a fan of the man one. He's written okay, but he's also voiced by Woody Allen, and like most of the general public, I do not like Woody Allen. I also thought the villain was underwhelming. His plan makes no sense, it's overly convoluted, and just plain dumb. Hans is alright, but I think it's a one and done for me. It was an awkward first step for the studio, but at the very least it is an interesting awkward first step.
Squad free. Baton free.
The Crude's got a sequel? Really? Why is this a thing? I never heard anyone talk about the first movie even when it came out, so why the hell did they make a sequel 7 years later?
I don't know, but it's a part of the ranking, so that means I have to watch it. I was not a fan of the first film, so let's just get this over with.
Oh. Well, okay, the animation is a lot better. The environments look good in the first movie, but here they are just popping with color. The characters look much better, so that's nice too. They're also a bit more interesting than in the first movie, especially Grug. Oh, they meet this other family who built this elaborate treehouse farm. That's pretty creative. And wait, What was that? Was that a good joke? And is that another one? Like, multiple good jokes? They're well written and have good comedic timing to them? Is this a good movie? Am I actually enjoying this? It's The Croods 2. Why am I actually liking what I'm watching right now?
I mean, it's not an amazing movie, but like, this is leagues better than the first one was.
I don't know what happened, but they actually took a mediocre and stock first entry and made a decently charming sequel out of it. For starters, the conflict is less about keeping them out of danger and more about whether or not they should trust this new family. That's a bit more interesting. They make it pretty clear that the Betterments have ulterior motives, but they actually change over the course of the film. Grug is more likable since he is concerned about Eep leaving the family, but that's not his entire character this time. In fact, that's honestly more of a side plot here. The real focus is on the potential conflict with the other family that doesn't feel forced. This is also Nicolas Cage's 100th acting credit, which is hilarious. Like I said, the animation's much better than it was last time. It is so vibrant and extremely colorful. The design of the treehouse is really creative, and I really like the different food and animal designs we see. And again, the writing is much better than the first one. There are a pretty good number of jokes that got genuine laughs out of me. One of my favorites was when they make it look like Eep is gonna be jealous of Dawn, but then she just gets really excited to have a female friend for once. That is a great subversion. The only love triangle comes from Guy's parents trying to set him and Dawn up, but neither of them are interested, so it does almost nothing, which I honestly really like.
While the first movie had a passable third act despite the first two being weak, this one, the third act is kinda underwhelming.
We find out that they've been feeding these punch monkeys bananas, but then it turns out they've been feeding them to a giant monkey and the guys get kidnapped so they need to go save them. It's not bad, there are some good moments. I think the punch monkey translation was the funniest bit in the whole movie, but the majority of this just wasn't very interesting and some parts felt a little dragged out. But on the whole, I can actually recommend The Croods: A New Age. I had very little expectations going in and I was very pleasantly surprised. It isn't an amazing movie, but it is an entertaining one that I'm actually glad I saw. Not sure if I'm gonna watch it again, but this was one of the more pleasant surprises in the marathon.
I'm gonna break you like a fucking horse.
Okay, I feel like this is gonna be one of my hotter takes in this video, but I didn't get into Spirit that much. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a good movie. There are a lot of things I really like about it. The animation is gorgeous. This movie looks absolutely beautiful. The 2D and 3D mesh so well together, and the movement is so fluid. I also think it's really interesting that the horse doesn't talk, kind of. They're able to give it a lot of personality just through its movement, which was really ambitious, though maybe a little too ambitious, because I didn't really find most of the other characters very interesting. A majority of the movie is built around the growing bond between him and this guy, and while the horse is very expressive, him not so much. We don't really know a lot about this guy, so their bond is okay, but not super compelling. This is one of those movies that just feels like you're watching stuff happen, and a lot of it feels a little disconnected. Some of the scenes are really good. When the Colonel tries to break him, it is extremely uncomfortable. The bonding moments are fine, and the chase sequence at the end is really good. But when you're just watching him flirt with this other horse that's barely in the movie, it's not very compelling because, again, she's barely in the movie. And when he gets captured a second time and has to pull this train, it feels a little repetitive. I think my biggest problem with this movie is the story. An animal being captured and trying to return to the wild is something that's been done many times before, and while this movie does it fine, I don't really find it super engaging. And I think most people will agree with me in that the horse's narration is completely unnecessary and the songs that play in the background are awful.
It's a shame because I've heard great things about this movie and I really wanted to love it, but it just didn't click with me the same way it does for a lot of other people.
It didn't get amazing reviews when it came out, so I guess I'm not alone, but I've seen a lot of people say this is one of the best Dreamworks movies ever. If that's the case, then great. I'm glad so many people were able to have a strong file list for this movie since, again, I really wanted it to be one of my favorites, but sadly that's not the case. I don't know, maybe I need to see it again, but for now I'll just say it's a good movie, just not really for me. I mean, I have a lot more respect for it after seeing the second one, so there's that, I guess.
But if it were me, I'd really want to be a giant woman.
Fun fact, I got this movie on DVD for Christmas when I was a kid and watched it a grand total of once. Meanwhile, the bonus short it came with, called Bob's Big Break, which came with these crappy 3D glasses, I watched many times. I just thought the 3D was cool, okay?
But yeah, I only saw the full movie one time until doing this ranking, and I can kinda see why, because I think this is probably one of the most adequate movies in the Dreamworks catalog.
Like, pretty much everything about this movie is alright, but not great. The story is fine, the characters are fine, the action's fine, etc. I will say the art style isn't the best. This was in those awkward years where Dreamworks can make good non-human characters, but then the humans can look kinda gross. As a result, the monsters ironically look more pleasant than the people. Aside from that, the movie is totally watchable. It's a parody of old monster movies, and it does that fine enough. Susan is a likable enough character, and the other monsters are decent too. Dr. Cockroach and Link get some good laughs, Insectosaurus just looks hilarious, and Bob has some good good visual gags and animation, though his dialogue isn't that great. The strongest thing about this movie is probably the writing. It's not one of the funniest movies ever, but it does have some good bits, like when the alien goes into his tragic backstory but keeps getting cut off because of his cloning process, or when they go through the space station with the most pathetic disguises that somehow work, or basically anything with the president. Like, he is by far the funniest character in the movie. With my favorite bit being in the military facility when he goes to push this giant red button on the wall that'll fire all of their nuclear missiles. He then asks which button gives him a cup of coffee and is told the other one. And then there's another giant red button right next to it. And if that wasn't enough, when he's told he was the one who designed that, his response is to fire somebody. Like, that is hilarious. And I do like Susan's arc about embracing being a monster. It's nothing spectacular, but it is enjoyable to watch unfold. So yeah, Monsters vs. Aliens is a fine little movie. I did have a good time watching it again, but I wouldn't be surprised if I go another 15 years without seeing it.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
Orion in the Dark is one of the most frustrating movies Dreamworks has ever made. Not because it's bad, but because it could have been fantastic. The idea is so interesting and so creative, literally personifying things like darkness, or sleep, or dreams, or quiet, or insomnia. It is so unique, and their designs are extremely distinct and inventive. There was so much potential in here. The world building in this movie is fantastic. I want to know so much about how all this works. I want to know what the other entities in here look like and how they operate. There are so many cool ideas.
But the problem is, the movie just ends up being disappointingly average.
The animation is really good on the entities, but the human characters can just look weird and a little off-putting, which I think is partially intentional, but I'm not entirely certain. Orion is not that great of a protagonist. Now granted, that's not normally an issue in a movie like this, since it's very much an along-for-the-ride movie, kind of like Alice in Wonderland, where you're less concerned about the story and more interested in just seeing what they come across. But they clearly tried to make Orion a legit character, and he's not very likable or interesting. His whole character is just, he's afraid of everything, and that's about it.
But that's not my main issue with the movie. My big problem is, I really do not like the framing device here.
About 20 minutes into the movie, we find out that all of this is a story that Orion is telling his daughter in the future, and while this maybe could have worked, they make it explicitly clear that none of it is real. All of it is entirely made up, and I find that really disappointing. Sure, there's a lot of other stories like this, like The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland, where it ends up all being a dream, but what makes those work is that not only do they save that reveal for the end, but in some cases they leave it more ambiguous, which I would have much preferred here. Instead, it just keeps being interrupted by future Orion and his daughter. I mean, the way it ties back into the end is a little inventive, but I still wasn't a huge fan. Because I think the story would have been much more interesting if they at least kept it a little bit more vague, but they don't. They make it entirely clear that none of this is real and all of it was made up, which again doesn't ruin the movie, but it does take it down a bit for me, since like I said, it takes away from the creativity a bit, and more importantly, it constantly interrupts what's going on, making it harder to get sucked in. This movie has a massive gap between critical and audience reception, since while critics absolutely loved it, audiences were a bit more mixed, and I think I can see why, because there's some really creative stuff in here, but a lot of it feels really dragged down by some underwhelming elements and just plain odd choices. I did enjoy watching this movie, and I still think it's good, but man does it feel slightly wasted.
I love gold.
I know this movie has a huge cult following, so I hope people don't get too pissed at me, but I think it's kinda average. What's really weird though is that this movie was a critical and commercial failure when it came out. It did not get good reviews at all, and didn't even make its budget back. I'm really starting to see why Dreamworks quit 2D animation, since not only did the quality go down with each film, at least in my opinion, but only one of them was a big hit. I've been seeing this meme go around a lot, and if you want to know why, this is why.
Sorry, weird side tangent. Road to El Dorado is alright, but to me, it just kind of feels like I'm watching a less funny Emperor's New Groove.
It came out the same year, has a similar art style, similar characters, and similar sense of humor. Tulio and Miguel are solid enough characters. I do like seeing them together, though they can be a little one-note. Chell's sexy as hell, I mean, interesting, but her chemistry with Tulio was pretty lacking. I mean, I think we all know which of these three are actually in love. Again, the animation is great. I think this might be the best blending of 2D and 3D the studio ever did, but it also could have been a little snappier. It doesn't have the same energy as something like Emperor's New Groove, so some of the visual gags don't have the punch they really need. The songs are pretty solid, if inconsistent. They have most of them play in the background, but then one is randomly a proper musical number, which is weird, but hey, It's Tough to Be a God is an absolute banger, so I'm not gonna complain. The story is basic, but there are some really strong moments. Like, I really like how the chief subtly hints to Miguel that he knows the truth, and is okay with it because he likes having them there. The humor is overall pretty good in this movie. There are some very funny moments, with my favorite probably being them cheating in the ball game. Though again, I wouldn't exactly call this one of the funniest Dreamworks movies ever, but on the bright side, it did give us a great selection of memes. This movie also blows its load way too early. Hey, if Dreamworks can make these kinds of innuendos, then so can die. The fight with the giant jaguar is freaking awesome. It would have been a great climax, but not only do we get an annoying third act breakup, but then we get another climax that's just them trying to ram a boat into a cave. And I'm sorry, but that is nowhere near as exciting, so the end of the movie just feels really underwhelming. Again, I know a lot of people love this movie, and there are some really strong elements. It unfortunately has too many things holding it back to keep it from being great for me. If someone puts it on, I'm down to watch it, but that someone is probably not gonna be me.
Release the Kraken!
This is the first of 3 movies I've talked about before, so I'll try not to repeat myself too much with these. I was one of the 7 people who actually saw this movie in theaters, and honestly, I think I liked it a bit more this time around, but I still get why some people don't. This has got to be one of the most cliched movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Almost every plot beat in here has been done before in other movies. Awkward girl doesn't fit in because she has a secret to hide, but a miscommunication with her crush causes her to discover that she has special powers her parents never told her about, so she gets angry and runs away, learns to use them from her grandmother. She finds out her popular classmate also has powers. They team up to stop a decade-long feud, only to find out the classmate is evil, so she and her family have to stop her. Big happy ending dance party. Though this is actually part of the story, so we'll give it a pass here. In fact, it's so predictable that the trailer basically spoiled the whole movie, and nobody cared.
Now with that said, why do I still like this movie?
Well, for starters, it's one of the best-looking Dreamworks movies ever. Why is this movie genuinely beautiful? The colors and the lighting, especially during the underwater scenes, look amazing. I will never understand why it looks as good as it does. I've seen a bit of debate over the art style, but I personally like it since it's not only very distinct, but I like how expressive a lot of the characters are, especially Ruby. The way she acts, and in particularly the way she moves, make her feel both like a real teenager and a giant squid monster. The characters and writing are pretty hit or miss. Ruby is an archetype, but at least she is a decent archetype. She is likable, and you can easily see her struggles. Her mom isn't just the typical overbearing parent like the one from Turning Red, for example. She's overall very patient with Ruby and acknowledges she's made mistakes, but you can still see where she's coming from. Her grandma is decent enough, her brother and father are just kind of there, her friends are boring but they're barely in the movie, so it doesn't really matter, and the ship captain and his crab are easily the best part of the movie. These guys are honestly hilarious. But the biggest missed potential in here is easily the villain.
I will admit, as predictable as Chelsea being evil is, there is one twist with her that I didn't see coming, but it doesn't really add much.
She claims to be the daughter of Nerissa, the Mermaid Queen, but then it's revealed that she is just Nerissa. I mean, you still know she's really evil, so it isn't that great of a twist. A lot of people say it would have been more interesting if she really was Nerissa's daughter and she formed a genuine friendship with Ruby that would then cause her to rethink her plans, and I agree, that would have been much more interesting.
That's definitely my biggest issue with this movie. Much like Orion in the Dark, there is a lot of missed potential in here.
If they really took the time to explore this undersea world and see different places and creatures, I think this movie would have been a lot better. On my first watch, I didn't realize how short it was, but it barely passes an hour and a half, and I honestly think it could have gone a little longer since they would have had more time to flesh things out. I've seen some people say this feels more like a pilot to a TV show than a full movie, and yeah, that kind of makes sense because I honestly think it could have been a lot better if they focused less on high school drama and more on the ocean, or again, just had a longer runtime. The climax in particular feels super rushed. I was expecting some big epic battle, but it's honestly pretty basic and over with quickly, though I do like how Ruby's math skills come into play since it's a nice way for her to prove herself. Oh yeah, the songs that play in this movie are completely forgettable, but at least they're original. As it stands, I think Ruby Gillman is totally fine. It's generic and predictable, but the main characters are decent, the animation is amazing, not every joke works, but there are some good ones, and the underwater scenes are pretty cool. I know the director said he'd be interested in doing a sequel, but I'd frankly be stunned if that happens.
Dude, this car kicks ass, and I can watch Madagascar while I'm driving!
This is actually my most rewatched Dreamworks movie ever. It was one of the only ones I had on DVD as a kid, and it was up there with the early Pixar movies as films my brother and I watched over and over again on the portable DVD player. Hell, my summer camp even had a thing where sometimes everyone would get up and sing "I Like to Move It, Move It" in the dining hall.
So I have a lot of nostalgia for this movie, more than pretty much any other Dreamworks film, and this way you know I am not biased in terms of this ranking because the movie itself is good. It's good. I like it. But it's not great.
I think the biggest issue is some of the pacing. The story is pretty basic, and the jokes are really good, but there are plenty of moments that drag or feel kinda awkward. Since this isn't exactly a very dramatic movie, if nothing funny is happening, it's not as entertaining as it could be, so it leads to some parts feeling not the best. But thankfully the movie is very funny. The characters are honestly pretty likable, and the writing is great, so it gets some really solid gags. Not to mention the animation has a lot of energy to it, so the visual gags are super fast-paced, which make them significantly funnier. This is what I wanted to see from Road to El Dorado. Plus, I challenge you to name one other kids movie where the main conflict is whether or not the main character is going to eat his best friend. Alex is already a fun lead, but watching him slowly descend into a primal state is both creepy, but also really funny. Marty and Melvin are both hilarious. Gloria is the weakest of the main four, but she's still fine. King Julian is great, easily Sacha Baron Cohen's most iconic role. The chimps aren't in it much, but they get some good laughs when they do. And of course, who could forget the penguins?
In fact, that's another issue with this movie. The penguins are barely in it, and I wanted to see more. They have easily the funniest moments in the film.
These guys have less than 10 minutes of screen time, yet are easily the most popular characters in the franchise, so much so that they got their own TV series Japan movie. Them hijacking the boat to Antarctica only to find it sucks. God, the timing and the delivery on that line are perfect. And the end with the boat being out of gas kills me every time. I strongly debate whether or not I should give this movie a 6 or a 7, since it is really funny and has some great moments, but sadly when you put it all together, the experience ends up being kinda average. I will always have a soft spot for this movie, but I can't exactly call it a masterpiece. But thankfully, this is only the first entry, so things will only improve from here, right? I mean, it's a ranking video and we haven't gotten to the other ones, so obviously, but whatever.
Alright, we are approaching the hour mark, and we are officially halfway through the ranking. Jesus Christ, why are there so many of these? Whatever, bring on the 7 out of 10s.
Super toilet.
Okay, I know this wasn't primarily made by Dreamworks, they co-produced and distributed it, while most of it was done by Aardman, but whatever, these movies still count. Anyways, Flushed Away is unique in that it was the first Aardman film to not be stop motion, since that wouldn't really work with a story revolving around water. I haven't seen that many Aardman films, but of the ones I've seen, I think this is the weakest, but I still think it's pretty good.
Honestly, I think this movie is one of the prime examples of a 7 out of 10 film, since, while there's nothing egregiously wrong with it, and it is good, it's nothing all too great.
Since this was the studio's first attempt at computer animation, it looks alright, but not that great. They were clearly trying to replicate the same style of their previous films, and I think there might be a bit less charm since it's not claymation, which means they had a bit more freedom. Again, it looks good, but not great. Roddy and Rita are fairly likable characters, and their relationship is nothing all too special, but it works well enough. Sid is pretty annoying, but thankfully he's not in the movie for very long. The frogs are easily the best part of the movie. These guys are absolutely hilarious. Ian McKellen does a great job as the Toad, yes, that is his credited name, and he has so many great lines. Plus, I'm a sucker for a good French joke, and Le Frog delivers on several of them. The sewer world is surprisingly really creative. There's a lot of great little details in here, and seeing how everything works is cool. Almost everything is made of some sort of real-life object, and it can be fun to try and spot what everything is made of. Plus, Rita's boat looks great, and leads to some fun action scenes. This movie underperformed when it came out, which is kinda sad, but I think I can understand why. This isn't an idea that sounds very interesting, and while the final product is good, it's not gonna blow you away or anything, so I can see why people wouldn't be very interested in it, but I still think it's worth a watch. Alright, it's been well over a year now. Can we please chill with the Kung Fu Panda 4 hate already? I swear, people act like this movie killed their mother or something. Like, cool your jets, people. This movie's fine. I can understand being a little let down by it, but the people who say it's one of the worst Dreamworks movies ever are just flat out wrong. It's not even bottom 10. Hell, I wouldn't even put it in the bottom half.
I know that's probably not the best way to open, but I've already talked about this movie in another video, and I think it just gets way more hate than it deserves.
I mean, this certainly isn't a great movie, but it still has some really good stuff in it. Like the previous Kung Fu Panda films, the animation is incredible, and the action is really good. Poe and Jen's fight in the temple, the tavern fights, the street chase, and especially the final battle are all super well done. These scenes have so much energy and creativity to them. It's great, and I really like the split screen effect that shows up every now and then. I also think this movie is really funny. The different characters they come across, like the Fish Captain and the Den of Thieves, get some great laughs, and Poe's dad's traveling might be the highlight of the film as it leads to some of the funniest moments. These two are honestly some of the best characters in the franchise. Also, side note, how the hell does James Hong still have this much energy at 94 years old?
The part where this movie lacks, though, is definitely in the emotional moments, but I'm willing to give it a bit of a pass because it really isn't trying to.
It's very clear this movie isn't meant to be as heavy as 1, 2, or even 3 for that matter, and I think that's one of the big reasons people get upset at this movie. I'll get more into this later, but the other Kung Fu Panda movies have some really good dramatic moments, which you wouldn't expect from a series with this title. So this one not really having them can seem like a step back, especially for what's likely the end of Poe's journey, but personally, I think if you view it as less of a finale and more of an epilogue, I think it works okay. Because while it isn't as dramatic, Poe does still have a decent arc about giving up being the Dragon Warrior, since it's not because he's too old, but because it's time for him to become something even greater, and he's not sure if he can handle that. I think that's a really solid idea, and it's not amazing, but it works well enough. A lot of people were really worried about Jen, especially given the voice actress, and while she's not a great character, she works fine. The biggest problem most people have with this movie, though, is the chameleon. I've seen some people declare her the worst Dreamworks villain ever, which, no, but she is one of the two that I think have the most missed potential. We'll get to the other one later. Her design and powers are awesome, but she isn't very memorable and doesn't leave much of an impact. Hell, her whole motivation comes from being denied the ability to learn Kung Fu because she was too small, which these masters clearly never met Mantis. She is pretty lacking, but I don't think she's terrible. A lot of people were also upset that the Furious 5 aren't in this movie until the credits, and yeah, that is a little sad, but I guess it is better to just write them out than have them barely in it to the point where they just feel shoehorned in like most of the side characters in Toy Story 4.
And I know I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for saying this, I think this movie is what Toy Story 4 should have been.
Both movies are fourth entries in a film series that almost everyone agrees was a perfect trilogy. However, there is one thing that sets them both apart, at least for me anyway. Toy Story 4 was trying too hard to be another perfect ending, and not only threw in unneeded characters when some of the most prominent ones feel like afterthoughts, but it also tries to have another big tearjerker ending when it wasn't needed and handled extremely poorly. Kung Fu Panda 4, on the other hand, doesn't try to do all that. It just tries to be another fun adventure in this world and give an epilogue to the main character. It doesn't try to shove the other characters in when they weren't needed, especially since they were already kind of sidelined in the last movie, and it doesn't go against what the other movies built up for the sake of making people cry. It's also not filled with bad jokes and rehashed elements, but that's beside the point. I know I just pissed off a lot of people for saying that, but that's honestly how I feel. Is the movie the weakest of the series? Yes. Was it needed? No. But does it ruin the purity of the franchise? Absolutely not. It's passable at best, but underwhelming at worst. It has problems, but they're not enough to ruin the movie. It's not one of the worst Dreamworks movies ever, and hell, it's not even one of the worst sequels.
Chicken, Peter, you just a little chicken. Chip, 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 chip.
Believe it or not, this is the highest grossing stop-motion animated movie of all time, even 25 years later. Safe to say, this isn't a very profitable art form, but that aside, how's the movie itself? I mean, it's good, but I don't think it's great, which is really surprising because not only is this the third highest rated Dreamworks film ever on Rotten Tomatoes, but there was a big push to get this movie nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, and while that didn't happen, it was what finally made the Academy create the Best Animated Feature category.
I'm really surprised about that because I don't see that many people talk about it nowadays.
The animation holds up really well. I'm gonna be honest and say stop motion is a medium I respect more than I enjoy. It just looks kinda off to me a lot of the time, but thankfully this and the other Aardman films have a more unique art style, which I think looks a lot better. Everything else in this movie is good, but not great. The story is pretty much The Great Escape, but with chickens, and I really love how dark it gets at points, while still being comedic. Like, one of the chickens straight up dies, and the shots they use for Mrs. Tweedy make her look pretty intimidating, which just makes it even funnier. The characters aren't anything groundbreaking, but they are pretty likable, and the comedy, as previously said, gets some good laughs, though even then, it's still not one of the funniest animated movies I've ever seen. The one thing I don't like is, it's another liar revealed story, but thankfully it does it much better than something like A Bug's Life or even Over the Hedge. Not only is the way it's revealed pretty funny, but it doesn't take up too much time. They mope for a minute or two, but then they get right back to business. Still would have preferred it if it wasn't there, but hey, at least it could have been worse. Thankfully, the rest of the third act is pretty good. Again, a lot of the stuff is much more impressive when you know everything is stop motion. There are so many moving parts in a lot of these sequences, especially in the flying plane. Chicken Run might not be one of the best Dreamworks or Aardman movies, at least in my opinion, but I still think it's a good time. I'm happy I got the chance to check it out, and this likely won't be the only time I watch it, but I don't quite get why it got so much praise when it came out.
Also, I'd like to point out that Dreamworks had no involvement with the sequel that came out a few years ago, so it will not be a part of this ranking. Same with the new Wallace and Gromit movie.
If Abominable was cute, Dogman is adorable. I'm not kidding when I say this movie is one of the most precious things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, Dogman himself is just a little roll of sunshine, one that's good at stopping crime, but I also just want to play fetch with. But somehow he is not the cutest character in the movie. Lil PD is totally pure and way too good for this world. I love this little guy and I would die for him, no questions asked. Hell, even Big PD has some really cute moments. This movie is honestly just plain delightful. I swear, it's nearly impossible to watch any scene in this movie without smiling. I love the movie's animation style. It reminds me a lot of the Peanuts movie, but with even more energy to it. Plus, the comic book-esque giant words that pop up all the time are hilarious. The movie as a whole is really funny too. The writing and visual gags are on point, and it's extremely creative. The different inventions PD makes and the various ways he breaks out of jail are really fun to watch. And the climax is literally a bunch of buildings coming to life. That is so bizarre and yet so entertaining that I absolutely love it.
But if this movie is so charming, why isn't it higher on the list?
Well, for one thing, as delightful as this movie is, it's also relatively simple. Most of the other movies on the list will have more interesting stories and memorable characters. I mean, hell, Dogman doesn't even talk. He still has a lot of personality, which is impressive, but my point still stands. He won't leave as big of an impact as someone like Poe or Hiccup. The movie also feels kinda unfocused at points. Despite being the title character, Dogman actually disappears for several minutes, multiple times throughout the movie. Hell, I'd argue Petey is the main character, since he has an actual arc he goes through with becoming a father figure to little Petey. Granted, it is a good arc and extremely wholesome to watch, but it still feels kinda weird that we don't see too much of our main character. And the main villain ends up being this evil cyborg fish that Petey resurrects, but he doesn't really show up until the last third, and it feels like he was just kind of thrown in there so Petey has an excuse to become a good guy. Again, it is entertaining to watch, but I feel like they could have done more with him. I mean, this movie actually flies by at only 89 minutes, and I feel like it could have been a bit longer. Not a crazy amount, but I think some parts could have been reworked a little bit, but that doesn't take away from it that much. I still had a really good time with Dogman, and given how it's the newest Dreamworks film at the time of making this, it was a great way to end this marathon that took way longer than I originally anticipated. You know, it's really weird how, despite enjoying the first entries in 3 of the biggest DreamWorks franchises, I never saw any of the sequels when they came out. I grew up on Madagascar, yet never watched the second, really liked Kung Fu Panda, but didn't see 2 or 3 until years later, and loved How to Train Your Dragon, both the movie and show, yet didn't see the other movies when they came out. And I find that weird because I think most people agree DreamWorks has a really good track record with sequels.
Well, most of the time anyway.
Madagascar 2 was genuinely a big step up from the first movie. The location is a lot more interesting, the jokes are a lot funnier, and the pacing is a lot better. The first one's main problem was that some scenes felt a little awkward and dragged out, but here almost everything flows pretty well. You never really feel like a scene goes on for too long, which keeps the movie very entertaining. The only downside is that it can also feel pretty unfocused. While the first movie was mostly about Alex and Marty, with Gloria and Melman being there for support, here they give all 4 of the animals their own storyline. Alex reconnects with his father and has to prove himself to join the Pride. Marty meets a bunch of other zebras that all look, sound, and act exactly like him, even down to all of them being voiced by Chris Rock, which is honestly really funny. Gloria begins to feel like she needs to find love and meets this big hippo, and Melman thinks he's dying, so he tries to profess his love for Gloria.
Bad idea, buddy.
But that's not all. There's also a subplot where the penguins are trying to fix the plane to get everyone back to New York, and a group of humans that become stranded because of this, so they make their own village. And a river dries up, so King Julian and the lemurs decide to make a sacrifice, and the chimps get involved with the plane, and there's this evil lion trying to take over the pack, and yeah, you're starting to see the problem here. There is way too much going on in this movie, and it does not mesh together very well. Most of the plot lines are either resolved halfway through, barely get any focus, or just completely disappear until the last 20 minutes. Like, I genuinely forgot the humans were in the movie, and it becomes the main focal point of the climax. As the thing, the villain is pretty lame. He's not very funny or very memorable, so he just comes across as bland and annoying. Thankfully, the storylines are at least enjoyable to watch, and some do come together okay, but the majority of the movie feels like it's trying to juggle way too much at the same time. So while it is entertaining and very funny, it's not a movie that's gonna stick with me all too much. Still, I had a good time watching it, and I do consider it to be superior to the first movie. Only downside is it's one of those sequels that tries to work the number into its name. You're not clever.
Well, my thoughts on the Toy Story movies weren't enough to cancel me. I'll add even more fuel to that fire. Not really the biggest fan of Shrek.
Now let me make it clear, this movie is good. I do like it. I've watched it multiple times in my life, and every time I did, I had a good time. But with that said, I don't think it's all too great. I mean, like I said, this was the movie that changed DreamWorks forever. They experimented a lot in the beginning, but this was the movie that pretty much defined their style for most, if not all, of their future movies. Some would say for the better, most would say for the worst. But here, a lot of these tropes make more sense than in the later films. For starters, this was meant to be a parody of most Disney movies, so instead of having traditional musical numbers, it plays real-world pop songs in the background instead. There's an actual reason for them to be here besides just selling a soundtrack. Same goes for the dance party ending that almost every animated movie for the next 2 decades would try to replicate. The animation does a good job at being appealingly ugly. The characters do look a bit gross, but that's part of the idea, and thankfully it doesn't quite go too far. Well, most of the time anyway. The characters are also pretty solid. Shrek is a grump, sure, but he manages to remain likable. Donkey is one of the best examples of an annoying sidekick, since he manages to annoy the characters much more than he annoys the audience. Farquaad isn't a great villain, but he still works fine, and I gotta give him credit for being one of the few movie villains to actually keep his word and give Shrek his swamp back. And Fiona is really good too. Her backstory is interesting, she has some great lines, and I like seeing the relationship between her and Shrek grow. They have solid chemistry, and it feels pretty natural. Well, for the most part, but we'll get to that in a sec. And this was arguably the final nail in the coffin for celebrities being cast in every major animated film, but thankfully this is an all-around good cast that does a good job.
But now that the good stuff is out of the way, let's get into my issues with this film. One is that, honestly, I don't think the script is all that great.
Now don't get me wrong, this is a very funny movie, and it has some really good jokes, but on paper, a lot of them don't work really well. I think what makes most of this movie so funny is the delivery from the actors. Most of the laughs come from how something's said, not necessarily what's being said. Prime example is the line about Donkey making waffles. Written out, that joke is okay, might get a chuckle and not much else, but Eddie Murphy just says it with so much enthusiasm, you can't help but laugh at it. There's a lot of jokes in this movie like this, but even then, they don't always work. Like, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the Muffin Man routine with Gingy. I know we actually see the Muffin Man in the next film, but here this just feels like a pointless reference, and I don't really find it that funny.
I know a lot of people are going to hate me for saying that, but thankfully I'm not alone in my biggest complaint with this movie. The third act sucks.
So many rom-coms use this annoying cliche of, oh, one character overhears another character and misunderstands the situation, so now the couple doesn't like each other and they might not get together and blah, 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 blah. We have seen this a million times and it's almost never done well. And this is honestly one of the worst examples of it, since it just grinds the film to a complete stop. There's no jokes, no excitement, no interesting character moments. It just goes on and on and on. Even as a kid, I thought this part was dragged out. I mean, it does get a little bit better when Shrek and Donkey start talking to each other and then they storm the wedding, but it is not worth having to sit through all this crap to get there. I honestly considered fast-forwarding through this part when I got to it. But thankfully, it's at least partially saved by the ending. Farquaad getting eaten by the dragon is hilarious, and I really like how Fiona remains in her ogre form, because while most would see both her and Shrek as monsters, they see the beauty in each other, and it's really sweet. So again, again, I do like Shrek. I think it's a good movie, but I don't think it's all too special. There's a lot of people out there that really love this movie, and I'm sadly not one of them. This was the first movie to ever win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, and personally, I don't think it deserved it, since while it's mostly pretty good, it has too many issues that hold it back from being great.
We're bad guys. It's what we do.
I've seen a lot of people say The Bad Guys is one of the best modern DreamWorks movies, and while it is pretty good, there's a few things that weigh it down for me. Let's start with the positives, though. I think almost everyone can agree the animation in this movie is amazing. The art style is extremely distinct and eye-catching. The characters are so expressive, and it all has a crazy amount of energy to it. The action scenes in particular are fantastic, especially the car chase at the end. The story and characters are pretty basic, but they work well enough. It is a very standard heist movie, but it's at least an entertaining heist movie, and while it is predictable, you do like the characters and want to see them succeed. Especially Wolf, his arc honestly does feel pretty believable. I'll admit the setup of evil characters trying to go good is pretty similar to one of DreamWorks' earlier films, which we'll get to in a little bit, but I think having 5 different characters instead of just one is enough to make it stand out. It's also pretty easy to guess who the villain is, but thankfully this isn't saved until the end. It's revealed about halfway through the movie, which means the rest of it is dedicated to getting back at him, and when he does reveal himself, it is pretty funny. The voice acting is honestly really good too. I mean, I'm kinda surprised at some of these cast members. You got big names like Sam Rockwell, Awkwafina, and Craig Robinson, but then you've randomly got Alex Borstein, aka Lois Griffin, and for some reason, Lily Singh is in this movie, and she's weirdly not that bad.
But what really holds this movie back is the writing. It's like, for every really good joke that it has in here, there's another one that just completely falls flat.
Shark's obvious disguise as fooling everybody is funny. Burana farting whenever he gets nervous is not. It's like half of this movie is trying to be really smart, and then the other half is just trying to be for kids. I mean, yeah, I know this is technically a kids movie, but that doesn't mean they have to use this kind of humor. I think I would have gotten into this movie a lot more if they just tightened up some of the writing, and I do think some of the tension between Snake and Wolf is a little forced. It does work out in the end, but it's still something we've seen too many times in other movies for it to be really effective. But overall, I did enjoy The Bad Guys. It's got great animation, passable characters, and enough good jokes to make it worth seeing. There's a sequel coming out later this year, and given DreamWorks' track record with sequels, I'll definitely check it out, since if this was just the beginning, I am totally down to see where it goes from here.
Shrek is love. Shrek is live.
I think it's safe to say this movie's reputation has changed more than any other DreamWorks film. It got mixed reviews when it came out, then it was honestly pretty hated, and then some people started saying they like it, and now there's plenty of people that say it's better than the original.
And I do agree, but part of that is because, as previously stated, I'm not a huge fan of the original.
Both movies have one major issue that pretty much everyone agrees on, but they're in completely different parts of the movie. Shrek 1, it's the third act, while Shrek 4, it's the first act. Shrek's outburst towards Fiona feels way too mean and really out of character for him. Yes, it is part of his arc, and it's supposed to have been building up for a long time, but it still feels like he went way too far. If he showed some remorse immediately after, maybe it wouldn't be so bad, but as it stands, it does make it kinda hard to root for him after this. Not impossible, but it is an issue.
The other problem I have with this movie is that, much like Toy Story 3, I think it takes itself a little too seriously.
This movie is played a lot more straightforward than the other Shrek films, and it has a lot more dramatic moments. Some of them work pretty well, like when Shrek breaks down holding his daughter's doll. That is honestly really effective, and I like how the True Love's kiss doesn't work until Fiona actually loves Shrek again. But I wouldn't say they're all among the best I've seen. Hell, I wouldn't even say they're the best in the series. Because of this, the jokes take more of a backseat, and this franchise is mostly a comedy, so this one isn't quite as memorable as before in a lot of ways. Though there are some really good jokes in here, like the Pied Piper making everyone dance, or when Puss eats Gingy. That killed me.
Overall, I think the rest of the movie is pretty good.
I do think Shrek finding out he's gonna die is enough to at least partially make up for the outburst, since, I mean, even at his meanest, you don't really want to see that happen to him. Fiona leading this army of ogres is pretty fun, and I really like how they put a twist on the first movie where she has to hide her human form instead of her ogre form. That's pretty clever. Rumpelstiltskin is a pretty solid villain, since he's somehow a good blend of clever and pathetic. He's able to trick people, and yet he still comes across as a whiny loser. But thankfully the movie is aware of that, so he does have some very funny moments. The climax where they all storm his castle is really good. This is what I wanted to see from the third movie's climax, and the ending where Shrek says the best part of this was falling in love with Fiona all over again is pretty sweet. Shrek Forever After is a very flawed movie, but I still think it's pretty good. The Shrek franchise is one I'm as passionate about as most people, but it is one I mostly enjoy, and I'm glad I was able to end on a solid note.
Oh, right. Not entirely sure how to feel about that.
We're sending you back to the future!
People don't really seem to talk about Peabody and Sherman very much, and I don't really get why. It's not a great movie, but it's still worth talking about. I'll admit I'm not at all familiar with the source material. Hell, I didn't even know there was source material until I saw them referenced in a Simpsons episode.
But I guess that's nothing new for DreamWorks movies.
So I have no idea if this is a faithful adaptation, but I don't care because I still had a good time. The animation is great. I always appreciate it when DreamWorks breaks away from their usual style into something more unique, and this is one of the better ones they've had. I mean, these backgrounds alone look gorgeous. Because the movie is all about time travel, we're able to have a great variety in locations, elements, which helps the movie feel fresh. From the French Revolution to ancient Egypt to the Italian Renaissance, and easily my favorite, the Battle of Troy. Not only is the battle absolutely hilarious, but the captain is voiced by Patrick Warburton, and I don't think you could have possibly made a better choice. I was ecstatic when I first heard him speak. And what makes the movie work is both Mr. Peabody and Sherman are very likable characters. The dynamic is pretty interesting, and Peabody's knowledge works really well with Sherman's optimism. They have their snags here and there, but overall I do like seeing them together. The only downside is they're not alone in this adventure, they're joined by this annoying little snot. Yeah, Penny is genuinely insufferable in the beginning of the movie. I know that's the point, and she has an arc where she gets better, but good God, they made her way too unlikable in the beginning. If Sherman didn't bite her, I would have been more than happy to punt her straight through a window.
Also, I'd like to point out that this is by far the most unrealistic movie Dreamworks has ever made. Oh, not because there's a talking dog that can build a time machine, no. It's because in the beginning, the principal actually understood that Sherman was provoked into attacking Penny because she was bullying him. A principal would never do that in real life. He would just place all the blame on Sherman and Penny would get off scot-free.
Even her arc feels kind of forced. I do appreciate it because she's way less annoying, but it still isn't that great. And her chemistry with Sherman isn't very good, but they're also like 7, so I'll give it a little leeway. I also think some of the story aspects were kind of dumb, like Peabody almost dying because Penny got her toga snagged on a nail feels pretty stupid. I think they could have come up with a better way to do that. He turns out to be okay, but I think they could have done something different. But thankfully the climax is enough to make up for it, since seeing the characters from all the different time periods come together is pretty fun, and leads to some of the funniest jokes in the movie. So while this movie certainly has flaws, I still think it's a good time. It's funny, creative, looks great, and even has some nice heartwarming moments. No matter what time period you're from, it is certainly worth the watch.
Phew, that was a lot of 7 out of 10s, but now we can finally get to the 8s, i.e. the films that really start to justify doing this stupid marathon in the first place.
I'm bad, and that's good. I will never be good, and that's not bad.
Megamind was one of the movies I hadn't seen before this ranking, but I was pretty interested in, since while the reception for this movie was decently positive when it came out, it's gained a lot of love over the last several years, so I was curious to see what all the hype was about.
And while I don't quite love it as much as most people do, I do think it's a very solid movie.
The Superman story has been parodied multiple times before, but this one still manages to do it in a unique way, since both the hero and the villain have similar origins, but were given completely different fates. One was given a life of luxury, while the other was basically set up for villainy. I really like how both Metro Man and Megamind don't really take this whole hero and villain thing super seriously. Metro Man knows Megamind isn't really much of a threat, so he doesn't have to worry about him doing anything truly horrible, even after his supposed death. While Megamind knows that all Metro Man is going to do is throw him in jail, which he was literally raised in, so that basically means nothing to him. Especially with how easy it is for him to escape. Once Megamind does take over, though, it's a pretty interesting idea. I mean, he's been trying to take over the city his whole life, not really because he wanted to, but because he thought that's just what he was supposed to do. So it's interesting to see him try to find a new purpose in life. This is one of those movies that starts out really basic, but gets a lot more interesting as it goes on. Megamind and Roxanne have surprisingly good chemistry together, and you really do see them start to form a connection. We do have the whole third act breakup stuff, but it actually works pretty well here since there's an actual reason for her to be upset, and again, Megamind thinks all he's really good for is being the villain, when in reality, he's better off being a hero. On the flip side though, we have Hal, who's honestly one of the most hateable Dreamworks villains ever because of how unfortunately realistic he is. He is quite literally an incel, and the idea of an incel basically becoming Superman is kinda terrifying. Hell, we've seen what some of these guys are capable even without superpowers. I think Minion is probably my favorite character in the movie. Not only is his design great, but he has some of the best lines. Speaking of which, the comedy is mostly pretty good, though I wouldn't say this is one of the funniest Dreamworks movies ever. Same goes for a lot of the emotional moments. There's some pretty strong ones in here, but for the most part, it's pretty standard. The action scenes are really good, though, especially the fight with the giant robot. That is both really funny and pretty intense.
So I do like Megamind quite a bit, just not as much as most people seem to. I totally understand why people do get really into it, as again, there are some really good ideas and moments in here. I just don't quite love the entire thing.
Still, it's a pretty entertaining movie that I'm glad I finally got to check out. If you're like me and haven't seen it, I'd say give it a watch, because it's an overall very good time. Shame they never made a sequel, but sometimes that's for the best.
I feel berserk as a tightrope walker in a 3-ring circus.
Okay, so I don't really know what the general opinion on the Madagascar movies are, but I say they get better with every one, because I honestly had a really good time with Madagascar 3. I think it was the most interesting, the most creative, the most entertaining, and especially the most funny. I mean, dear God, this movie had me dying at so many moments, and I'd say about half of those come from the villain. Dubois is one of the funniest Dreamworks characters of all time. From the animation on her, to her voice acting, to how absolutely unhinged and determined she is, I was laughing almost every single time she was on screen. And thankfully, she's not the only great addition to the cast. The circus animals are all very likable. Vitaly is really interesting, with a backstory that's both funny and tragic. Gia is really sweet, and forms an honestly pretty cute relationship with Alex, and Stefano is simple, but he gets some pretty good laughs too. The subplot with King Julian falling in love with the bear was great, and the penguins disguising themselves was hilarious.
Though what shocked me the most is that I actually really got into the circus act.
Seeing them all train together together is honestly really fun, and the show itself is really good. The animation and camera work are fantastic and make it honestly feel like a spectacle. I admit the song choice could have been a bit better, but hey, it's still a really great scene. There's only 2 issues I have with this movie. One is that, like the second one, it can feel a little unfocused, not as much so, since it's clear some characters are more prominent than others, as opposed to the last one where they tried to give each character their own storyline. Here, Alex is obviously the most important, with Marty having a decent amount of screen time, but Melman and Gloria do feel a little sidelined. And hell, Maurice and Mort disappear for like 70% of the movie. I honestly forgot they were in here. The other issue is that, much like Over the Hedge and Chicken Run, we get another annoying liar revealed scene. Good God, why does Dreamworks keep using this so much? Again, it's not the worst use of it, but I wasn't a big fan either. Aside from that though, I honestly had a great time with this movie. I thought it was a fantastic conclusion to the trilogy, with the best characters, jokes, and scale to come from all 3 of these movies. I hear there's a 4th one in development, so I'm not entirely against it, but I'm not entirely sure how they top this one, because I honestly think it's a really good movie.
Though I do have one idea of something that could top it, but yeah, we'll get to that in a sec.
If you ask someone what some of the best movie trilogies ever are, you'll usually get answers like Lord of the Rings, Back to the Future, and the original Star Wars films, or at least that's what I'd say anyway. But another one some people would throw in there is the How to Train Your Dragon trilogy, and if this is the weakest of the 3, then I think that's a pretty fair thing to say, because despite not quite reaching the heights of the first 2, it has some really strong elements. For starters, it has some really interesting character arcs. I like how they focus on both Hiccup and Toothless individually, as opposed to solely focusing on their bond, which is a nice change of pace. It's cool seeing Hiccup step up to become the new chief of Burke and lead them through a transitional period, while also seeing Toothless grow closer with the Light Fury. Would have liked to see a lot more of that, but more on that later. And weirdly, the weakest movie of the trilogy has the best villain. He isn't exceptional, but he at least feels like an actual character, as opposed to a random giant dragon, or Sir Screams-a-Lot. He feels like a real guy with an interesting plan and understandable motivation, which I enjoy.
Where this movie falls a little flat, though, is the story.
A majority of it is just focusing on the Vikings moving to a new location, and that's really about it. For a film subtitled The Hidden World, we barely actually get to see the hidden world, and I think that is a huge missed opportunity. I would have much rather seen Toothless discover more about this place while also bonding with the Light Fury instead of just the Vikings setting up camp and dealing with this guy. And I know the most commonly criticized aspect of this trilogy is the side characters, and for the most part I didn't mind them, but this is the only one where they got on my nerves. Especially Rough Nut when she leads the bad guys to their camp. Most people agree this movie isn't quite as strong as the first 2, and I think this is a large part of the reason why, since most of it doesn't really feel like it's pushing anything forward.
I say most of it because the 3rd act is really strong.
Not only is the action really good, but the goodbye scene between Hiccup and Toothless is really touching, because the reason they have to say goodbye actually makes sense. There have been a lot of issues with humans and dragons living together, so maybe they should go their separate ways, but they also don't completely cut them off forever. As we see in the epilogue, they can still see each other, and maybe someday there will be a time where both species can live together in peace. I think this is a really mature idea, and it works pretty well. It certainly helps that there's a reason for this that they've been exploring for the whole movie, and it doesn't go against the lessons of the previous films just for the sake of being a tearjerker, unlike other animated films that came out that year. So while How to Train Your Dragon 3 might not be as strong as its predecessors, it's still a very excellent movie that provides a great ending to a great trilogy.
No one sucks the life from my penguins except me!
I'm honestly kind of surprised this ended up being as high as it is, but Penguins of Madagascar is honestly one of the most fun Dreamworks movies ever. I'm serious, this movie is honestly a really good time. The penguins are almost unanimously regarded as the best part of the Madagascar movies, so it only made sense to give them their own film. Hell, before this, they even had their own TV show that everyone watched for about a season or 2 and then completely forgot about. The dynamic between these guys is just as good here as it was in the other movies, if not better. Their differing personalities lead to some great exchanges, and the arc of them learning to appreciate private isn't crazy, but it's still nice to see. The action sequences in this movie are honestly really good. The scene where they jump between like 5 different planes is insane, and it's all done entirely as one continuous camera shot, which I know is easier in animation, but it's still a lot of fun. Plus, this movie has some S-tier comedy. I went on about how funny Madagascar 3 was, and this movie is even funnier. I think the biggest laugh I got was when Skipper asked Gwalsy if he can fly a plane, and he responds, "There's only one way to find out." And then it cuts to him reading the owner's manual, only for him to say he can't actually read, so they just improvise. That is amazing.
But the penguins aren't the only piece of comedic genius in this movie. We also have another legendary villain in the form of Dave.
Derek has so many great bits, it's unbelievable. Just the fact that Dan is voiced by John Malkovich is great because he has such distinct delivery with his enunciations that it makes almost every line funny. And I didn't think his minions all being random celebrity jokes would be that funny, but the different ways they incorporate the last names into real-life actions is pretty creative, which just makes it even funnier. I'd say my only genuine complaint with this movie is that the Northwind agents feel a little bland. They're not bad characters, characters, but they don't really add a whole lot. Because the penguins have such memorable personalities and great chemistry, these guys honestly feel kind of standard. The polar bear has some good laughs, but other than that, I don't really remember much about these guys. I feel like people will get mad at me for putting this movie so high, but I don't care, because it's a great time. This isn't a movie that's going to be really dramatic or emotional, it's just supposed to be fun. But it still manages to be smart, which to me is enough to justify putting it this high on the list. I had an absolute blast with Penguins of Madagascar, and I think it is very unlikely that this will be the last time I see it. This is another one I'm honestly kind of shocked ended up so high, but I can't help it. I kinda love this movie. I loved the Captain Underpants books as a kid. I feel like every third grade boy born after 1994 can say that. I mean, they've got everything young boys love. Superheroes, toilet humor, and anti-fascism. No, seriously, go back and read some of these. But sadly, I never saw the movie when it came out, and it didn't get much attention, largely due to when it came out. If this movie came out like 5 or 10 years earlier, it would have done much better. But I randomly watched it on impulse a few years ago, and I had a great time with it.
And on rewatch, I think I liked it even more this time because this might be the funniest DreamWorks movie ever made. Or at least the funniest film primarily made by them, anyway.
The writing in this movie is top tier, and it has so much speed to it that the jokes just keep coming, and almost all of them land. Captain Underpants' first transformation scene, the sock puppet future Harold makes up, the secretary being on hold for the entire movie, almost everything that comes out of Professor Poopy Pants' mouth. But easily the funniest scene in the movie is when George and Harold discover how to switch Mr. Krupp and Captain Underpants back and forth. They then proceed to snap and pour water on him in all sorts of various ways, ending with making him juggle water balloons, snapping, and then they land on his head one by one with them snapping in between every single one.
I am not joking when I say both times I watched this movie, I had to pause it at that moment because I seriously was laughing so hard I could barely breathe.
There's a lot of immature humor in this movie, but it still manages to feel tasteful since they use it sparingly and it's supposed to feel juvenile. This is a movie that can really make you feel like a kid again, and part of it is thanks to the leads. George and Harold are great characters, and their friendship is just so wholesome. I feel like regardless of your age, you can very easily identify with these guys, especially with how overbearing their school is. Krupp is the most cartoonishly evil principal ever written, which just makes him all the more hilarious and their pranks that much more fun to watch. The only big issue I can think of as this movie is there are some problems with the pacing. They spend a bit too much time just trying to hide Captain Underpants, and it drags on after a while. It can still be funny, but it reaches a point where it gets kind of repetitive. I would much prefer it if we spent more time with Professor Poopy Pants, because he's by far the funniest character in the movie. Thankfully, we get some great stuff with him. The climax is both very funny and very creative. I love how it takes elements from multiple books while still being original, and they even do the flipperama. That's how you know these people really care.
Also, does anyone else find it funny that so many DreamWorks movies are based on books, yet this was the first one many people had actually heard of, and the only one since then that a lot of people have heard of was also written by Dave Pilkey?
Objectively, I can't say this is a spectacular movie, since it is pretty basic and you're not gonna get too much high value of it, but I still say it is fantastic because it just made me laugh so hard. If you haven't seen it, go check it out, especially if you grew up with the books like I did, because sometimes even the smartest people can still be a little dumb. Also, the theme song is annoyingly catchy. It was stuck in my head for like a week, but I guess that's what happens when you get Weird Al Yankovic to write it. That could not have been a more perfect choice.
Go for the panda! They've given up on life anyway!
I feel like Kung Fu Panda 3 is kinda underappreciated. Unlike 4, most people seem to like this movie, but agree it isn't quite as good as the first two, which seems to be the typical pattern most trilogies follow. But I still think this movie can come pretty close to the highs of its predecessors. The biggest problem is that it leans a bit too hard into the slapstick at points. Now, thankfully, it's very good slapstick, so the movie is really funny, possibly the funniest in the series, but it feels like it takes away a bit from the story. But it still manages to be really interesting. I love Poe's arc about learning to take Shifu's place and becoming more of a mentor, which also acts as a nice setup for later. But I think it's funny and nice how he knows Poe will mess up, because as he says, if you stick with what you are, how can you become anything more? That's a really good line. It is fun seeing him not only learn how to become more of a leader by teaching these pandas, but it's also fun seeing all of them learn to use their various skills to become fighters. So the big fight at the end is really creative. Sadly though, most of the Furious 5 feels pretty sidelined. The only one that plays a big role in the story is Tyrus. But I think my favorite part of the movie is seeing the bond between Poe's two fathers. Mr. Ping was already one of the best characters in the series, so it's nice seeing him get an actual arc he goes through. And I think his line about Lee coming back meaning more for Poe instead of less for him is the most heartwarming moment in the series, and a really good lesson a lot of people can learn. And Li Shang is a great character too. I really love when he tells Poe about his mom.
But the other thing that holds this movie back is, like with 4, the villain isn't all that great.
Again, his design and abilities are great, and he's voiced by J.K. Simmons, which is an immediate yes, but what really holds him back is his motive. I mean, yeah, we know he wants revenge on Uwe for putting him in the spirit world, and he wants to take over the valley, but his backstory feels pretty weak in my opinion. They say he and Uwe were like brothers until they came across the Valley of Pandas and learned to use their chi, but Kai learned he could also take chi away from others to make himself stronger, and then suddenly he's a bad guy. Why? How did he learn he could do this, and why does he want to do this? Did he just want to be a better warrior? Was he jealous of Oogway? Did he always want to take over the valley? I don't know, because it has basically no explanation. I mean, Chameleon's motivation was weak, but at least it was something. I really think this needed to be elaborated on more. Luckily, that's not enough to take away from everything this movie does right. I'm honestly a really big fan of Kung Fu Panda 3. It might have a few snags that hold it back, but the vast majority of this movie is great, and it is easily the best third entry in the Dreamworks franchise ever. Honestly, not sure which series I like more, this or How to Train Your Dragon, because they're both really good.
There is no Easter Bunny, there is no Tooth Fairy, and there is no Queen of England.
Did they make the Easter Bunny Australian for Hugh Jackman, or did they get Hugh Jackman because they made the bunny Australian?
Regardless, Rise of the Guardians was one of the movies I was most interested in checking out for this ranking. It did not do well at the box office when it first came out, but it has gained a large cult following over the years, possibly due to Tumblr, and it has some really strong elements.
The world building is easily the best part. The designs for most of the Guardians are so good, and they all have such varying personalities, which leads to a really fun dynamic. My favorite is easily the Tooth Fairy. She is both adorable and unhinged, which is great. The different ways all of them do their jobs is really cool, and I love how they all have their own different methods of travel. Santa has his sleigh, the Easter Bunny goes through tunnels, Sandman floats on a cloud, Tooth Fairy can fly, and Jack Frost goes with the wind and uses his staff. The snow globe portals are so creative and make for a really fun visual. The animation is really good. I do think some of the kids look a little off, but for a few of them it's intentional, so it works fine enough. And the main characters look great, though I will admit I'm kinda mixed on Jack's design. The other characters are much more unique, while he's just a guy in a hoodie with white hair. On the one hand, this does reflect how he's a lot younger and more carefree than the others, but on the other hand, I feel like we could have gotten something a lot more creative. Or hell, why not incorporate the clothes he was wearing when he died? That could have been interesting. But thankfully, he's still a good character. Not only is his backstory pretty freaking heavy, but he just wants to be believed in the same way as the other Guardians are, which is interesting. And you really do want to see him succeed. Same goes for everyone else. There aren't a huge amount of jokes in this movie, but the few it does have are pretty good. The running gag about painting things red or blue is really funny. So many scenes have a great amount of energy to them, which isn't too surprising when you find out the director went on to help with Spider-Verse.
I feel like we very easily could have had an absolute top-tier Dreamworks movie in here, but it is so held back by one of the most underwhelming villains in Dreamworks history. And it sucks, because he really didn't need to be.
For starters, his name is pretty dumb. I can understand not calling him the Boogeyman, but Pitch Black is still kinda lame. I feel like they could have come up with something better. His design is also extremely boring. You're telling me you came up with these very distinct and cool designs for the heroes, and then the Boogeyman is just a guy in a trench coat? Why am I supposed to be scared of that? You could have done something so much better. His motivation could be interesting with how it parallels Jack about wanting people to believe in him, but it doesn't work very well because his plan is pretty basic and his writing is extremely generic. Some of his shadow powers are kinda cool, but overall this guy is just a complete dud. I think I would have really loved this movie if they just picked up some of the issues with him, because the rest of it is really good. I'm really sad it flopped when it came out, because I think there was a lot of potential for future movies in this world and with these characters. Rise of the Guardians is really good, but I feel like it could have been great.
Finally, a worthy opponent. Our battle will be legendary!
So, funny story, my father saw Back to the Future when it came out in theaters, and then didn't see another movie in theaters again for 23 years until he took me and my brother to see this. No particular reason, he just wasn't motivated to go and no one gave him an offer.
This doesn't mean that much, I just find it really funny that he went 2 decades without seeing a movie in theaters, and Kung Fu Panda was the film that brought him back.
But hey, if it had to be a family movie, this was easily one of the better ones. Almost everyone groaned when they saw the trailer for this movie because, well, it's Jack Black in Kung Fu Panda. That just sounds dumb. But thankfully, the people making this movie put actual effort into it, resulting in one of the most beloved Dreamworks movies ever made. Even all these years later, people still love this film, including me. I mean, it looks freaking gorgeous. I think this was the first 3D Dreamworks movie to genuinely look really good, so much so that it still holds up today. This was also their first foray into proper action sequences, and it turned out really well, since there's some really impressive stuff in here. The bridge fight, the chopsticks battle, and of course Tai Lung's escape sequence. This scene alone is near perfection and easily the best part of the movie. And most surprisingly of all, we get an actually very complex story. Seeing Po go from a fat food lover to a very skilled kung fu warrior is really fun. But what's even better is seeing Shifu and Tyrus warm up to Po. At first they want nothing to do with him, but after seeing what he's really capable of, they do come around, and it's great. I do wish we got to see more of the others though. Hell, Monkey only has 8 lines in the entire movie. Yes, I counted. I think it goes without saying this movie is hilarious. Again, that chopsticks battle is priceless, and Master Oogway is one of the best uses of the old mentor in any movie I've seen. A surprisingly large number of kids in my graduating class from high school use lines from him as their yearbook quotes.
I'd say this movie is just short of getting a 9 out of 10 from me, because I'm gonna be honest, I think Tai Lung is a little overrated. Ugh. Why is the villain the one thing these movies can't get right?
Now, he's not bad. He's much better than the previous villains I've talked about. He looks and sounds really cool. His backstory is interesting, and again, that escape sequence is masterful. But because the majority of the movie is preparing for his return, we don't really get to see that much of him, and he doesn't have that many memorable lines. Well, except for the meme, of course. I also feel the need to bring up the fact that many people classify him as a villain you root for, but this guy didn't just try and take the scroll by force, he literally went on a rampage through the valley attacking innocent people. If anything, his backstory makes me more sympathetic towards Shifu than him. But luckily, the fight at the end makes up for it. Not only are the action and comedy blended perfectly, but I love the theme of how there is no secret to being the Dragon Warrior, and how Po realizes this thanks to his dad. I wish I could have put this movie higher, but I still really enjoy Kung Fu Panda. I loved this movie as a kid, and it's only gotten better with time. It's very poetic that people didn't have faith in it when they saw the trailer, because much like Po himself, it really rose up to me more than what was expected.
That is the last of the 8 out of 10, so now we're getting into the 9s, and oh my god, we are finally nearing the finish line.
Be very, very quiet. I'm hunting rabbits.
I wouldn't call myself a huge fan of Wallace and Gromit, but I do enjoy their shorts, with the close shave easily being my favorite. It's the perfect blend of dark, funny, and creative. However, I can say with 100% confidence that Curse of the Were-Rabbit is the best thing these two have ever been a part of.
I was honestly pretty hesitant to put it this high because it's one of those movies that's funny, but not really much more than that. But Jesus Christ, this is one of the funniest animated movies I've ever seen in my life.
It's honestly kind of crazy just how hilarious this movie is. I was not expecting to love it as much as I did, but I think almost every joke in this movie works to some degree, and there's just so many of them. I actually watched this movie with my friends a week before starting this marathon, and I like to go in chronological order with these, but when I got to this, I still watched it again purely for how funny it is. I think I could just spend this whole segment going over my favorite jokes. So, yeah, why not? Let's do it. Victor's hair getting sucked up, gold. The bullet routine, gold. The innuendos in the garden, gold. Them cheering when they think the beast is dead, gold. The beast isn't actually dead yet, gold. The giant rabbit puppet, gold. The plane chase during the climax, sweet mother of Christ. This made me laugh harder than anything else in this marathon. I'm telling you, this movie might be a comedic masterpiece. But thankfully, that isn't the only strength it has. Wallace, and especially Gromit, are just as likable here as they are in the classic shorts. Wallace is somehow able to be both smart and stupid, which makes him very endearing, and I absolutely love Gromit. You really do feel bad for this guy at points, but the fact that he actually does get his recognition at the end is very sweet. Much like Chicken Run, the claymation is super impressive. The story is a pretty fun take of the classic monster movie formula. I think the twist is pretty easy to guess, though that might be because I knew about it going in, but it still manages to be very effective because the reveal of Rabbit Wallace is hilarious, and the reveal of Wallace Rabbit is somehow even funnier.
I think the only genuine issue I have with this movie is the fact that Wallace turns back to normal completely out of nowhere.
I guess they imply that the rabbit was killed in the fall, but I don't know, I feel like they should have at least had something in there. They were touring with the idea of Hutch building something that could fix it, but that ends up not doing anything, so it just feels pointless. But I will slightly excuse it for the box that says, contains nuts. How the hell did they get away with that? This was the first stop-motion movie to win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, and the only other DreamWorks film to win besides Shrek, and I am eternally grateful for that, because this movie is an absolute riot that I am so glad I finally got to see.
Have you ever dreamt of a better version of yourself?
Again, I know a lot of people will not be happy with me for saying Shrek 1 isn't very great, but I think I can at least partially win some of you back by saying that Shrek 2 completely lives up to the hype.
If Shrek 1 was the movie that defined the traditional DreamWorks formula, this is the movie that nearly perfected it. For starters, it is substantially funnier than its predecessor. It is filled to the brim with all kinds of jokes, and almost all of them hit. Visual gags, clever writing, background jokes, blatant jokes, subtle jokes, fantastic delivery. This movie nails almost every aspect of comedy, and it is great for both kids and adults. I think my favorite joke is when the giant gingerbread man destroys a Starbucks parody, and then everyone runs into another Starbucks that's directly across the street. That is pure gold.
But this movie didn't just up the comedy, it also has a much more interesting story.
Shrek meeting Fiona's parents is pretty interesting from a comedic and dramatic standpoint. I really like how we get to see the reactions to this frankly bizarre scenario, and it feels very realistic. King Harold is honestly pretty understandable, and while you don't agree with his actions, he still manages to remain likable. The fairy godmother is a fantastic villain, as she's the perfect blend of funny and serious, plus her dynamic with Prince Charming is great. And this was the movie that gave us Puss, who's one of the most popular characters in the series, and he's great, though I will admit his rivalry with Donkey is a little pointless. It isn't very funny, and doesn't really add a whole lot, but they're still great characters regardless. We also get a lot more of the side characters in this movie, both new and old. It's really great seeing Gingy, Pinocchio, and the Three Blind Mice save them, because it leads to some great bits, and Doris is just an absolute icon. Where this movie really shines, though, is the third act. Talk about a massive jump up in quality. The supposed breakup between between Fiona and Shrek actually works here, since it comes from Shrek thinking it's what's best for Fiona, meanwhile Fiona quickly realizes something is wrong. It's also great seeing King Harold come around and do the right thing. And do I even need to bring up the famous I Need a Hero sequence? This is one of the most acclaimed movie scenes, well, ever, if I'm being honest, and it's warranted because it's awesome. I also find it kind of funny that this movie came out the same year as the SpongeBob movie, which also used a cover song to make a legendary climax. Insert Phineas and Ferb nickel joke here.
I'm gonna be honest though, the climax would only be half as good if it wasn't for the song.
Don't get me wrong, seeing them storm the castle with a giant gingerbread man while the guards fight back is a lot of fun, but all they really do for the most part is yank the door open while milk gets poured on them. It's still cool, but I don't think the sequence would be as universally beloved if they didn't go way harder on the song cover than they needed. Seriously, why did the orchestra and Jennifer Saunders put this much effort into this? I don't know, but I'm glad they did because this is honestly better than the original song. I have no idea why so many movies still use it, because they're never gonna top this. The only other issue I have is I think the fairy godmother goes down a little too easily. Like, we just had this crazy awesome sequence, and then we get a good character moment with the king, but after that it's just boop, done. Feels a little anticlimactic.
But any issues I have are nitpicks. This movie is an absolute delight, and it is easily the best film that the Shrek franchise has given us.
Am I gonna get hate for putting this above Shrek 2? Nah, probably, but I don't care. I think everyone collectively rolled their eyes when they saw the trailer for this movie because, well, it's Puss in Boots 2. Who the hell was asking for this? But then it got crazy good reviews from critics, and when it finally released to the public, it spread like wildfire. Everyone was talking about how good this movie is. It's honestly kind of shocking, though when you watch the final product, it isn't hard to see why. For starters, look at it. This is one of the best looking Dreamworks movies ever. The art style is freaking gorgeous. Almost all of it looks hand-painted, which works really well for the fairy tale setting. It also takes clear inspiration from Spider-Verse with the lower frame rate during the action sequences, but it still feels like its own thing. Speaking of which, the action in this movie is incredible. Remember how I said the Shrek 2 climax is a bit simple? Well, here these scenes are crazy elaborate, and it is so creative. The whole movie just feels like a roller coaster at points, and it's also just as funny as Shrek 2, if not funnier, with my favorite joke being the Excalibur still having a rock on it. Even though technically Excalibur wasn't the sword in the stone, but who cares, it's still funny. And it's crazy morbid at times. Almost all of Jack Baker's doesn't die in this movie, which is messed up, but also pretty hilarious with all the different ways they bite the bullet, or unicorn horn. The story is very simple, but it's also very effective. While Puss isn't a super complex character, you can identify with his fear of losing all his lives and dying for good. So his motivation is pretty understandable, and his arc about appreciating the life he does have is really nice. His relationship with Kitty is pretty interesting, since they're really the only two people that can fully understand each other, so you do like seeing them together, and Burrito is just precious. I would die for this little guy. Not all of his jokes work, but the ones that do really land. I knew I was gonna love this guy just from the speaking Spanish versus English joke in the beginning. It helps that his naive optimism balances out with his crazy dark backstory. I was stunned when I first saw that. And do I even need to analyze the panic attack scene? It's easily one of the two most discussed aspects of this movie.
So instead we'll discuss a debate I've been seeing going around the internet lately, and that's people discussing the difference in quality between this panic attack scene and the one in Inside Out 2.
Personally, I think both work just as effectively, but for different reasons. Puss's works better from an outsider's perspective, while Riley's works better from an insider's perspective. One, we are literally diving into the mind of the person having it, while the other we see how someone else can help the person going through this. I don't think one's necessarily better than the other, they're just different. But I think the most impressive thing about this movie is the villains. There are 3 of them, all with completely different tones and styles, and all work super well.
I say for a villain to work, they have to be at least one of 3 things: interesting, entertaining, or intimidating. And this movie aims just to have one of each.
Goldilocks is interesting in that she's the one you can understand the most and has the most distinct backstory. Jack Horner is entertaining in that he's the comedic villain who's absolutely hilarious. And Death is intimidating in that you legit get scared whenever he shows up. It's also interesting how they all fall along different planes of morality. Goldie is fairly sympathetic, Death is more neutral in that you can understand his perspective, but what he's doing is clearly wrong, and Jack is completely irredeemable to a comical degree. But as far as they go individually, Goldie is probably the weakest. I do like her dynamic with the bears, but if I had any issues with this movie, it's that they way overuse the just right joke. She still works, just not as well as the other 2. Jack, once again, is just so cartoonishly evil that he is hysterical, and his design combined with John Mulaney's voice just make him even funnier. His back and forth with the cricket is gold. But Death is easily the best thing about this movie. He is a legit menace, and every time you see or hear that whistle, it gets super intense. I like how they use him sparingly too, but not so sparingly that you forget he's in the movie. While he only shows up a few times, that's all he needs to make an impact, because you know he can could show up at any moment, and this way, he still remains a threat, since if he kept showing up over and over again, it would lessen its impact. All of this builds up to one of the best climaxes in Dreamworks history. We get a great standoff with everyone else, and it leads into Puss's final confrontation with Death. Not only is this battle absolutely amazing, but Puss saying just one is so freaking satisfying. The only issue with Death I can think of is that they treat Puss figuring it out like a big reveal when it's pretty obvious who he is, but on the bright side, at least one of the best lines in the movie.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say. This movie's freaking awesome.
It is the prime example of a movie people didn't know they wanted, because this movie doesn't just go toe-to-toe with Shrek 2, but it, in my opinion, tops it.
For some reason, I can't stop saying Baby Moses. Baby Moses, Baby Moses.
Before starting this marathon, I hadn't even seen half of the movies in the Dreamworks catalog, and out of all of the ones I hadn't seen prior, Prince of Egypt was by far the one I was the most excited for. This is possibly one of the most acclaimed animated movies of all time, and let me tell you, that is completely warranted. I love how most of the early Dreamworks movies were trying to spite Disney and Pixar by taking their type of formula and mocking it by adding in swears and adult jokes, but this one spites them by taking their style and just doing it better.
I'm not joking. I genuinely think this movie is a better animated musical than The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Lion King, and possibly even Aladdin. Yeah, I said it.
I'll admit I've never seen the Ten Commandments, and I was not raised religious, so I'm not super familiar with the story of Moses, but it makes for a very effective film. The connection between Moses and Ramses is very compelling and very tragic. Seeing Moses discover who he really is and the countless suffering that's been brought on his people for generations is heartbreaking, but even more heartbreaking is the Pharaoh's line of how they were only slaves. He's very hesitant to take up the mantle of a prophet, but he knows that he has to, because if he doesn't, then no one else will, and thousands of innocent people will continue to suffer. But while Moses is great, Ramses is even better. He's honestly one of the best villains in any movie I've ever seen, because he feels so genuinely human. He was raised by his father to prioritize growth and power above anything else, and is burdened by the thought of being the weakest link in the chain, the failed ruler whose actions will lead to the downfall of one of the most powerful empires in the world. But at the same time, he does feel remorse for his actions because it cost him the relationship with his brother, the person he cared about more than anyone else. This scene right here is the most powerful shot in the movie. We see Ramses go through almost every emotion imaginable in just a few seconds before he succumbs to his pride and anger and doubles down on the slaves. This movie has a tremendous sense of scale to it. So many of these shots feel larger than life, and the animation is freaking incredible.
But if there's anything in this movie that's stronger than the leads, it's the soundtrack.
The score is amazing, and the songs are extremely powerful. Deliver Us perfectly encapsulates the struggle of these people. All I Ever Wanted is a great subversion of the I Want song, since it's about him questioning his desires rather than expressing them. Through Heaven's Eyes is a nice break from the heavier moments. When You Believe is beautiful and a great way to showcase them finally gaining their freedom, but nothing compares to easily the best part of the movie, The Plagues. I've listened to the song several times since watching this movie, and it still gives me chills. It starts out faint and haunting before growing in tempo and impact. The contrast between Moses and Ramses combined with the boomingly powerful choir is immaculate, and my god, the visuals in here are incredible. But in sharp contrast, the smiting of the firstborns is disturbingly quiet. We don't even see what happens inside the houses, but we don't need to. The chilling winds are more than enough. And the parting of the Red Seas is just a fantastic way to end off the film.
Sadly though, there are a couple of little things that hold this movie back from being the absolute best in my opinion.
The first is the tone can be a little inconsistent. The movie tries to have some moments of comic relief and it never really works, but thankfully that doesn't happen often. The second is that while the side characters are fine, they work, they aren't very memorable. And the third is these guys. They add basically nothing to the story, and playing with the big boys is easily the worst part of the movie. It is a boring, generic, and extremely repetitive song. Some of the visuals are cool, but you could cut this song and these characters out of the movie completely. Aside from those small grievances, The Prince of Egypt is honestly one of the most enthralling animated movies I've ever seen in my life, and if you haven't seen it, fix that as soon as humanly possible. How did The Boss Baby come from the same studio that made this?
We have dragons.
How to Train Your Dragon is one of those movies that, even at a young age, you can tell is something really special. I think this was actually my favorite movie for a brief time period, and while it's not up there anymore, it is still extremely good. And what's crazy is that it really shouldn't be. This movie is absolutely full of cliches that we've seen a million times already, yet it's still able to breathe new life into them, and that's because everything unique this movie does is fantastic. First off, the world is incredible. Berk feels like it has so much history despite just being a small island, but the decision to set this movie in Viking times was extremely creative. The dragons are all amazing. They have such a great variety in terms of size, shape, abilities, and personalities. There's not one dragon species that looks like another. I especially love Toothless's design. He's just the perfect blend of cool and adorable. But the second thing this movie does great is the characters. Hiccup is so endearing, and he's super easy to connect with. All he really wants to do is impress his father and his people, which has been done so many times before, but it's still really interesting. Like I said earlier, a lot of people complain about the side characters, but I never really minded them. I actually like Fishlegs. Snatlet's just there, and the twins, one is fine, but the other is voiced by TJ Miller, so that's the only one I could do without. But thankfully, everyone agrees Astrid is really good, and Gobber might be the best character in the series. I love him. The most pleasant surprise, though, is Stoic. He very easily could have been an unlikable character, but you honestly can understand his perspective, mainly because of his background. Vikings have had this lifestyle forced onto them for centuries, and he's a natural product of that. But the main thing that saves him is right after he says Hiccup isn't his son, he gives this brief look of regret.
I'm not kidding when I say that 1 second alone completely saves his character, because he knows what he just said was awful, but he can't take it back.
But the heart of the movie is easily Hiccup's connection with Toothless. Watching the bond between these two slowly grow over time feels incredibly natural, and it's just so wholesome. Plus, I love how Hiccup uses what he learns with Toothless in dragon training. The flight scenes in this movie are absolutely incredible. It was originally released in 3D, and it really felt like you were flying around on the back of a dragon. Seeing this in theaters when I was only 7 years old was one of the coolest experiences I ever had, and the animation and score are just top tier. That goes for all 3 of the movies in the series. The one thing I will knock it down a bit for is that the third act is kinda underwhelming. It turns out that the dragons are attacking because they need to feed this one giant dragon, and this feels a little bland. I don't know what else they could have done, but I feel like they could have at least put a bit more originality into this. It's not terrible, but it's easily the weakest part of the movie for me. The rest of it, though, is absolutely top tier. Honestly, it is a crime that this movie didn't win the Oscar for Best Animated Feature. I mean, I know Toy Story 3 had the win guaranteed since it was nominated for Best Picture, but like, this should have been nominated for Best Picture. It's a great movie. But whatever, there's also the second one, which also didn't win. To be fair, it had some pretty steep competition like Song of the Sea, The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, hell, the Lego Movie came out that year, so I can easily understand why it lost to Big Hero 6? What? Okay, this is pretty ridiculous, but whatever. At least the third movie has a chance. There's no way it's gonna lose to— oh, come on! Well, they might not see the strength of the series, but I do. It is the highest rated DreamWorks movie of all time, and while it doesn't quite top my personal list, I think it fully deserves that title.
And the best part is, since I'm doing this ranking now, I don't have to watch the live-action remake! Woo! Celebrate good times, come on!
I really debated these top 3 entries, especially these next 2, so this could very easily change, but for now, I think I'm okay with the placements. Anyways, The Wild Robot is freaking outstanding. I was really looking forward to seeing this movie again, especially since it was the second to last film in the marathon, so we got to end with something really heartfelt and gorgeous, and then a fun little treat afterward. I think this might have the best animation in all of DreamWorks. I mean, my god, every shot from this movie could be hung in a museum. The colors are so eye-popping, and the characters all look great, and the score, oh my god, the music is so incredible. How did this not win the Oscar? I mean, I haven't seen The Brutalist, and I'm sure it's really good, but still. The connection between Roz, Bright Bill, and Fink is adorable and so heartwarming. You really do grow attached to these 3, and all of them grow over the course of the film. I love seeing Roz overcome her programming to find her humanity, Bright Bill take a more leading role while also learning his true past, and Fink learn to actually care about others.
And one thing I didn't notice on my first watch is that this movie is very much an allegory for neurodivergent parenting, both the parent and the kid.
Roz acts nothing like anything else on the island, and Bright Bill acts a lot like a robot because that's what the person who raised him acts like. But most of the other animals make fun of him for it. I didn't put that together, but I really like it since it feels subtle and they're not constantly bashing you over the head with it. I also find it really unique that instead of a third act breakup, we get a second act breakup. This surprisingly breathes new life into this trope since it feels like a natural part of the story rather than forced excuse for drama. It really does weigh on Bright Bill, but Roz and Fink are still willing to help him because they have to. The flight sequences are gorgeous, and the chase scene in the lab is really intense. Roz and Fink working together to save the animals from freezing to death is super captivating and one of the best parts of the movie. I also love how a film that's really artistic and emotional is also extremely funny, and the voice acting is really good too. For what may look like a typical celebrity voice cast, all of them feel incredibly natural. Hell, I barely even recognize most of them.
The only issue with this movie is that the climax feels pretty rushed.
It does have some great moments, like when Bright Bill tells Roz he loves her and calls her mom, and the fire on the island looks incredible, but the main threat is someone we literally just met, and the tone doesn't mesh very well with what came before. Like How to Train Your Dragon, it's not awful, and it doesn't ruin the movie, movie, I just think it could have been handled a lot better. Speaking of which, I've seen some people say Roz leaving at the end goes against the point of the movie and makes the climax entirely pointless, but I disagree. Not only does she reconnect with Bright Bill, but she would have lost her memories if she went with them. Plus, as Roz says, they gained something more valuable than her staying, a true sense of community. And there's gonna be a sequel, so it's very likely she'll find a way back. Either way, I think it works fine enough. The Wild Robot is easily one of the 2 most popular DreamWorks movies of the decade so far, and that praise is completely warranted and then some, because it is quite simply beautiful.
You know, Mo's Vikings didn't bury their leaders when they died. They put them in long wooden ships and cremated them at sea. Like this.
I feel like a lot of people will disagree with me saying How to Train Your Dragon 2 is better than the first one, but just know it's pretty freaking close. To me, this is everything I wanted from a sequel to that original film. We get to see even more of the world, we meet some great new characters, discover all sorts of awesome new dragons, they actually age up the characters, with something you rarely see in animated franchises. I think this movie acts as a fantastic continuation of the first one.
I have seen quite a few complaints thrown around at this movie over the years, so I think I'll address those.
The first is that this and the third one supposedly dumbed down Astrid to just Hiccup's girlfriend, and I disagree. She's still tough, snarky, and takes charge when she needs to, like in the first film. She might not have an arc, but she's still very likable, and she and Hiccup have great chemistry together. The second is, again, the side characters, but I didn't mind them that much since they really aren't in a huge amount of the movie. The love triangle between Fishleg, Snaplout, and Roughnut can get a little annoying, but thankfully they drop it like halfway through, so it isn't a huge deal. But the one complaint I do agree with is Drago is a pretty annoying villain. He's a lot like the High Evolutionary from Guardians of the Galaxy 3, where he's an interesting idea, being a man who's lost his home and family to dragons, so he went mad and now wants to control them, but it's pretty hard to take him seriously with all the screaming. Thankfully, the rest of the movie totally makes up for that. Meeting Hiccup's mother and seeing her nurturing this nest of dragons is really interesting. Like the first movie, we get all sorts of interesting designs, and it really helps the world feel even more alive. Hiccup's struggle about taking over as the Chief of Burke is a great continuation of his arc from the first movie, as well as a great setup for the next one. Again, this is a very relatable mindset, and I love how he really does grow to feel more like a leader. Even Alan has a solid enough arc. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I do still like him. Though I think the strongest aspect of this movie is Stoic. Seeing this character, who was initially built up as the no-nonsense tough guy, genuinely be afraid for his people and his family is honestly kinda terrifying because it shows just how much of a threat Drago is. His reunion with Valka is one of the most heartwarming moments in all of DreamWorks, and I love seeing them really come together as a family.
But that just makes what follows even more devastating.
Drago using the Alpha to control Toothless and forcing him to attack Hiccup is terrifying, and Stoic sacrificing himself to save him is heartbreaking. Sure, we've seen hundreds of parents die in kids' films before, but not like this, and they were very rarely as prominent as Stoic was. And this isn't some kind of fake out or reverse later, he stays dead. The only thing that makes it even more upsetting is when Hiccup snaps at Toothless. It's honestly one of the saddest moments I've ever seen in an animated movie, but that just makes their eventual reunion and Drago's defeat that much more satisfying. It might have a few snags, but I love How to Train Your Dragon 2. It is a fantastic evolution to an already fantastic movie, and it is easily one of the best animated film sequels I have ever seen. If there's any takeaway from this video, it's that DreamWorks has a great track record when it comes to sequels, and this is easily one of the best. Keywords being one of. There were several movies I deeply regret not seeing when they were released in theaters, and Kung Fu Panda 2 is easily one of the highest entries on that list, because I freaking love this movie. I wasn't entirely sure if this was gonna top the list, but I had a pretty solid feeling, and this is one of those movies where the more I think about it, the better it gets. Much like Shrek 2 or How to Train Your Dragon 2, this movie takes what worked well in the first movie and improves it in literally every way. I mean it when I say everything about the first movie was improved for this one. The story is better, the action is better, the comedy is better, the animation is better, and above all else, the character moments are better. Pretty much every character from the first movie has evolved in some way. Poe's bond with Shifu in the Furious 5 is clearly way stronger here than it was last time, especially with Tigress. The scene where they spar together on the boat is really endearing, and a huge step up from how she felt about him last time.
I am also very grateful that there is no romance between the two of them. In fact, I think this is the only DreamWorks franchise that has no romance in it whatsoever. Well, okay, until Poe's dads. Yeah, I said it, these two are in love, I will not hear otherwise.
But they aren't the only ones who have grown. Shifu was already very wise in the last movie, but he feels like he's grown even wiser for this one, which I really like. This is the only film in the series where everyone besides Tigress actually has their moments, which is another thing that makes it the best. Hell, even Mr. Ping has grown from the first movie, because he finally achieved his dream of making tofu.
But yeah, all of this stuff is great and all. What about the villain? I mean, that is the one thing that every other Kung Fu Panda movie struggle with, so I doubt this one would be that much better.
Whoa! The only reason you're still alive is that I find your stupidity mildly amusing.
Christ! Christ!
If you showed me all 4 of these animals and told me the peacock would be the one I was most terrified of, I'd say you're crazy, but my god, Lord Shen is up there with Ramses and Death as one of the top 3 best DreamWorks villains ever. Remember how I said a villain needs to be one of 3 things I mentioned earlier to work for me? Well, Shen is the ultra-rare case where all 3 of those things apply. He is legit threatening. He commands so much power and authority, which combined with his blade skills and super weapon make him someone you certainly don't want to mess around with. But at the same time, his backstory is really compelling. He was so concerned about a future where he goes down a dark path and is seemingly defeated by a panda that his solution was to simply get rid of all the pandas in the most inhumane way possible, which ended up sealing his fate, both in the path he followed and in the one who would stop him. Much like Ramses, he was too concerned about what his parents thought of him and was unable to let go of that, even when he became the very thing they feared. And somehow through all of this, he's still able to be funny at points. They have some genuinely great jokes with him, and they don't feel out of place or take away from his evil. I think part of that is because Gary Oldman does an A+ job voicing him. As stated, the rest of the movie is really funny too. Scenes like the Masters willingly locking themselves away, Poe being carried up the stairs, and then not being able to hear him at the end just kill me every time. The action scenes are super creative, even more so than the first movie. We get a great variety in locations, which leads to some really fun scenarios like the chase in the city and the bomb factory.
But easily the strongest aspect of this movie is the emotion.
This might take the candle for the highest body count in any family film I've ever seen. As I alluded to earlier, Shen literally committed genocide against the pandas, and that's the reason Poe ended up in the valley in the first place. Poe being constantly haunted by visions of his past is super intense. Another big reason Shen is the best villain in the series is because of his connection with Poe. He was responsible for the deaths of countless of his kind, including his own mother, and Poe's struggle to come to grips with that is heartbreaking, especially since it almost ends up with him getting killed multiple times. When we fully see his backstory of how his mother sacrificed herself to save him, it is the most powerful and devastating moment I've ever seen in a DreamWorks film. But it's through the acceptance of his pain that Poe is finally able to achieve inner peace, the one thing Shen was never able to do. Easily my favorite moment in any DreamWorks film ever. And it only gets better when he uses that inner peace to destroy Shen's weapon once and for all.
Yeah, this movie is honestly amazing. I mean, is there anything wrong with it? Well, there is one thing, which may seem kind of stupid, but hear me out.
They constantly say how it's up to Poe and the Furious Five to save Kung Fu, but that has basically nothing to do with Shen's plan. I guess his weapon will make Kung Fu obsolete since they need something much stronger and he's going after Kung Fu masters, but I don't know. They mention this quite a few times and even include it in some of the plot summaries, which I don't really get since it doesn't really play a role in the story. I know that's a pretty dumb thing to critique, but I do find it kinda odd. If it makes you feel any better, I'm very stingy with my 10 out of 10, so that's why I put this movie as a 9. But whatever, that doesn't change the fact that this has basically everything you would want in a DreamWorks project. It's funny, engaging, emotional, action-packed, and has some of the best moments in any animated movie I've ever seen. I know this is probably an uncommon choice, but I can now fully say with confidence that I believe Kung Fu Panda 2 is the absolute best DreamWorks movie ever made.
And there we go. That is all 50 of them. Oh my god, I finally did it. I did enjoy most of this ranking, but it was a lot harder than the Pixar one, not only because DreamWorks' track record isn't strong, but also because I had twice as many movies to go through. Believe me when I say, this was a lot, and while I'm happy to say I did it, I am never doing a ranking this big again. Oh, am I kidding? I'm probably gonna end up doing all the Disney movies at some point, but whatever. That's a problem for a future me to deal with.
To wrap this up, I'll just say DreamWorks is one of the most lopsided animation studios in the world. From cinematic gems to hot garbage to just about everything in between, DreamWorks has been through a lot over these past 3.5 decades. And they are not slowing down as they've got 3 more movies set to release later this year. Personally, I only have an interest in one of those, but that doesn't change the fact that pretty much anything can happen with the studio, and I will always appreciate them for that. Thank you all for watching, and don't let the door hit you on the way out.